He pulled her out of the flames. Unbeknownst to him, she was the one who had destroyed his daughter's life. That night, Nathan Cross didn't go out to be a hero. He just wanted to go home to his 7-year-old daughter, screaming in pain. But fate doesn't ask anyone's opinion. A car overturned in a sea of flames. A woman was trapped inside. And a man whose hands had once saved lives in war couldn't stand idly by. He didn't know that the decision he made that night would change everything. If you're following this story, please hit like, leave a comment with your city name below. I want to know how far this story has come. The rain came sideways that Thursday night. Not the soft kind of Pacific Northwest rain that locals shrugged off. The kind that made you question whether the sky had developed a personal grudge. It hammered the windshield of Nathan Cross's 2019 Ford F-150 in sheets so thick that even the wipers on full blast couldn't keep up, just smeared the world into a gray blur of highway lights and tail lamps. Nathan had the heat turned up too high. He knew it. His uniform shirt was sticking to the back of his neck, and the defroster was making that faint burning smell it always made when it worked too hard. But he didn't reach for the dial. He was too busy doing the math in his head, the way he always did on the drive home. 23 minutes from Station 7 to the house on Birchwood Lane, assuming no accidents on I-5 North. Mrs. Kowalski from next door was sitting with Lily. She charged $12 an hour and never complained, but she was 71 and got nervous if things ran past 9 o'clock. It was already 8:47. He pressed the accelerator a little harder. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He didn't look at it. It buzzed again. He flipped it face down. Whatever it was could wait. What couldn't wait was Lily, 7 years old and already familiar with the inside of too many hospitals. Already knew words like inflammatory response and titanium alloy and post-surgical protocol, words no kid that age should carry around. She'd stopped asking why her shoulder still hurt 6 months after her surgery. That was the part that killed Nathan the most. Not the crying, though the crying gutted him every single time, but the silence. The way she'd gotten used to it. His daughter had learned to live with pain, and he hadn't figured out how to stop it. Nathan pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and breathed through his nose. Slow, controlled. The same way they'd taught him at BUD/S, when the water was 48 degrees and the instructors were screaming, and the only thing between you and quitting was the space between your ears. You don't fall apart. You don't get that option. He'd been telling himself that for 14 months. The highway ahead was nearly empty. Storm had driven most people off the roads, which was why he saw it happen with horrible, perfect clarity. The silver Mercedes came from the right, the Issaquah on-ramp, moving way too fast for wet pavement. Nathan clocked it the way he'd learned to clock everything in his environment, automatic, unconscious, and his foot eased off the gas even before his brain caught up with why. The sedan fishtailed, corrected, fishtailed again. The driver was fighting it. For 1 second, Nathan thought they'd recover. Then the rear end stepped out completely, and the car went sideways across 2 lanes, and at 60-something miles per hour, sideways on wet asphalt is just a preamble. It happened fast and slow at the same time, the way violence always does. The Mercedes clipped the concrete median barrier on the driver's side. Not a full impact, more of a grinding sideswipe. But that was enough to flip the physics. The car rolled. 1 full rotation, sparks spraying off the roof like a grinder, and then it came to rest on its passenger side about 40 yards ahead of Nathan's truck, sliding another 20 feet before the guardrail stopped it. The fuel tank went 3 seconds later. Not an explosion. Movies always got that wrong. It was more of a whump, a deep percussive compression of air. And then the orange glow started underneath the vehicle, eating upward through the chassis with a speed that surprised even Nathan, who had seen vehicles burn before. He was already pulling over. He didn't think about it. There was no internal debate. His body was doing the thing it had been trained to do: assess, move, act. While some quieter part of his brain was registering that this was bad, that the fire was moving fast, that he could see someone moving inside the wreck. He killed the engine, grabbed the seatbelt cutter and the compact trauma kit from the glove box. He kept them there out of habit, same as most medics did, and was out of the truck and running before the door had fully swung open. The rain hit him like a wall. He'd left his jacket on the passenger seat. Didn't go back for it. The heat from the burning car hit him at about 20 yards. a dry, pressing wave that pushed against the cold rain in a way that felt almost disorienting, like standing in two weather systems at once. Nathan got low instinctively, angling his approach from upwind, scanning the wreck. The car had come to rest on its side with the roof facing him. The windshield had blown out. He could see the empty frame, glittering safety glass spread across the wet asphalt like scattered ice. Through the gap, past the deployed airbags, he could see movement. An arm, a hand, fingers spread, pressing against the inside of what had been the passenger window and was now the ceiling. Alive. Hey! He was 10 feet away now, crouching, feeling the heat press hard against his face. Can you hear me? I need you to answer me. A sound from inside, not words. Something that might have been a word that pain had chewed beyond recognition. The fire was coming from underneath, working its way toward the interior through the crumpled floor panels. He had maybe 2 minutes before that equation changed dramatically. Nathan went around to the roof, now the exposed side, and got his fingers into the frame of the missing windshield. The edge was jagged. He felt it open a line across his palm without caring about it. He pulled himself up and got his upper body through the opening, and the smoke inside was already thick enough to make his eyes water. She was there. A woman, maybe late 20s or early 30s, still buckled into the driver's seat, which was now the left wall of a sideways compartment. The airbag had hit her hard in the face. Her nose was bleeding steadily, and her bottom lip was split. One arm was hanging at an angle that said the shoulder was dislocated, maybe worse. She was conscious, but barely. Her eyes were half open and moving in that unfocused way that meant the brain was still trying to catch up with what had happened to the body. She had dark hair plastered across her face from the rain that was coming through the windshield frame. She was wearing a white silk blouse that was already ruined, and her seatbelt was pulled so tight across her chest from the impact that Nathan could see she was struggling to breathe around it. "Look at me," Nathan said, keeping his voice flat and even. "Eyes on me, right here." Her eyes found his face. There was a second of genuine terror in them, the animal kind, pure and unthinking. And then something steadied, like she was choosing to hold on. "I can't," she started. "You don't need to talk. I'm going to get you out. Don't fight me, don't grab at things, just let me work. You understand?" A small nod. The smoke was getting worse. He could feel the heat through the roof panel under his chest. He reached across her body to find the seatbelt release, got his thumb on it, pushed. The belt was locked from the impact. Jammed mechanism, common in rollover crashes. He pulled the cutter from his pocket, worked the blade under the belt away from her skin, and cut. She sagged. He got his arm under her shoulders and took her weight. She made a sound that was half gasp, half cry. "Your shoulder," he said. Yeah. Tight, breathless. "I know, I'm sorry. We don't have time to do this gently." He looked at the windshield opening. "I need you to use your other arm, whatever you can give me." "Okay." Her voice was clearer now, finding its edges. "Okay." He moved her toward the opening. She was small, maybe 5'4", 120. But a dead weight was a dead weight, and the angle was wrong. And the heat was serious now. And when he finally got her through the opening and lowered her to the wet asphalt on the far side of the car, his arms were shaking. Not from fear, just from physics. He dropped down beside her and got her moving, half carrying, half walking her away from the car, out of the immediate heat radius. Her feet were working, which was something. They made it to the median before the interior of the Mercedes caught. Behind them, through the rain, the fire made its sound. Nathan lowered her to the ground. She was shivering hard, or maybe trembling. Difficult to tell the difference at the moment. Her one good arm was wrapped around herself, and she was breathing in short, careful increments. He opened the trauma kit. "Where's the worst pain?" "My arm." A beat. "My chest." And my face, actually. Something almost wry flickering across those half-focused eyes. "Probably my face." "Your face is fine." He was already doing a rough assessment, running through the checklist that was just muscle memory at this point. Pupils equal and reactive. Tracking, speaking in complete sentences. Probable dislocated shoulder, possible rib fractures, laceration above the left eyebrow, nasal impact with possible fracture, but no arterial bleed, no obvious signs of spinal compromise. She'd been lucky in ways she didn't know yet. In the distance, the sound of sirens. Someone had called it in. "What's your name?" he asked, pulling a trauma dressing from the kit. A pause. Like the question took a second to reach her. "Celeste." "Celeste." He pressed the dressing above her eyebrow. "Hold that." She raised her good hand and held it, looked at him. "You went into a burning car," she said. It didn't come out like gratitude exactly. More like she was just trying to get the facts of it settled in her mind. "Yeah." "Why?" Nathan looked up from what he was doing. In 15 years, 12 in the Navy, 3 as a civilian medic, he'd never quite had someone ask him that. Not like that. Not like they genuinely couldn't work out the arithmetic. "Because you were in it," he said. She stared at him for a moment. Her eyes were dark and very direct, even through the shock. Then she looked away, back up at the rain falling out of the black sky, and she didn't say anything else. The first fire unit arrived 4 minutes after that. Nathan stood back, gave the responding medic a quick handoff. Female, 30s, rollover MVA, probable shoulder dislocation, possible rib fractures, alert and oriented, and watched them take over with the practiced efficiency of people who knew their jobs. He retrieved his trauma kit, walked back through the rain to his truck, sat in the driver's seat, looked at his hand, which was still bleeding from the windshield cut. Not bad. He wrapped it in a spare gauze pad from the glove box, pressed it, held it. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Mrs. Kowalski. He called back immediately. "Nathan." She picked up on the first ring. "Thank goodness. Lily's been asking for you. She's—" A pause where she dropped her voice. "She's been having a hard night." "I'm on my way." He was already pulling back onto the highway. 5 minutes, 10 at most. When he came through the front door of the house on Birchwood Lane, Mrs. Kowalski met him in the hallway with that specific expression he'd come to recognize, the one that said, "I don't know what to do, and I'm grateful you're home," and pointed toward the narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms. He could hear it before he got there. Not crying, exactly. More like the sound of crying that had been going on long enough to run out of tears and become something else. This thin, exhausted keening that was somehow worse than full-throated sobs. He pushed Lily's door open. She was lying on her bed with her knees pulled up and her good arm, the left, wrapped around them. The right arm, the one with the shoulder, lay at her side with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned not to move it unnecessarily. She was wearing her purple dinosaur pajamas, the ones with the little sauropods all over them, and the light on her nightstand was on, and she had Clementine, her stuffed rabbit, pressed under her chin. When she saw him, something in her face cracked open with relief. "Daddy." "Hey, Bug." He crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed, and she turned toward him with that careful, controlled movement she'd developed, protecting the shoulder automatically. He wrapped his arms around her, avoiding the right side, pulling her close. She pressed her face into his chest. Her back was shuddering. "It was bad tonight?" he said into her hair. "It woke me up," she said, muffled. "The hurt woke me up." Nathan closed his eyes. The shoulder had started hurting 3 months after the surgery. A surgery that was supposed to have been routine. A minor structural repair after a fall at school had partially torn her labrum. An outpatient procedure. They told him she'd be back to normal in 6 to 8 weeks. They'd used the word routine 4 or 5 times in the same conversation, as if saying it enough times would make it stick. Instead, 6 weeks post-op, she started complaining of deep, aching pain. Not the expected surgical recovery pain. The doctors were clear about that distinction early on, but something different, something that didn't follow the right timeline, that wasn't responding to the right treatments, that kept producing results in her blood work that her orthopedic surgeon described with careful neutrality as slightly elevated inflammatory markers, and followed with phrases like, "Let's monitor it," and "not uncommon in pediatric cases," and could take longer than average to settle. 14 months of "let's monitor it." 14 months of his daughter crying in the night. Nathan had filed every form, called every specialist on the insurance network, argued with 3 different billing departments, and mortgaged his professional credibility by asking every physician colleague he knew for a referral, a second opinion, anything. He'd gotten sympathy. He'd gotten professional courtesy follow-up appointments where doctors looked at the same records and reached the same careful, non-committal conclusions. He hadn't gotten answers. He sat with Lily until her breathing evened out and the shuddering stopped, and then he sat a little longer just to make sure, and by the time he made it to the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water, it was 10:15 and Mrs. Kowalski had let herself out. He stood at the kitchen sink and drank the water and looked out the window at the rain and didn't think about the burning car or the woman in the white blouse or any of it. He thought about Lily's face when she'd said, "The hurt woke me up," and what it would take to make that stop. His hand throbbed under the gauze. He unwrapped it over the sink. It was a clean cut, not deep. It needed antiseptic and maybe a butterfly closure. He had both in the bathroom cabinet. He fixed it mechanically, standing in the bathroom mirror, and then stood there a moment longer than necessary looking at his own face. 48 hours of tiredness parked behind his eyes. A jaw that needed a shave. A scar along the left side of his chin from a night in Kandahar that he never talked about, because what was there to say about it, really? He turned the light off and went to bed. He didn't know her last name until the next morning. It was on his phone before his alarm went off. Not because he'd set a news alert, he hadn't, but because Darnell from Station 7 had texted him at 6:04 a.m. with a screenshot in the message, "Bro, is that you?" The screenshot was from the Seattle Times website. The photo had been taken by someone in a passing car. Grainy cell phone footage stabilized and cropped. It showed a man pulling a woman through the blown-out windshield of a burning car, both of them lit orange-gold by the fire, the rain a visible diagonal streak across the frame. Nathan stared at it for a long moment. Then he read the headline, "Billionaire Celeste Sterling survives dramatic crash on I-5, rescued by bystander." He looked at the photo again. He looked at the name, Celeste Sterling. He had heard the name, of course. You couldn't read a business section or scroll past a finance headline in the last 3 years without encountering it. America's youngest self-made billionaire. 29 years old, something like that. Built a medical technology holding company called Meridian Apex out of what the profiles always described as nothing, which meant nothing in the way that nothing meant when you were already educated and connected and operating in a world that opened certain doors. He wasn't bitter about it. He just knew how those stories got told. The articles this morning were different. They had the word miraculous in them a lot. He put his phone down and went to make breakfast. Lily came out of her room at 7:15, moving with the careful deliberateness she always had in the mornings before the ibuprofen had a chance to work. She sat at the kitchen table and watched him work the stove with the particular quiet that Nathan recognized as the residue of a hard night. That not quite there stillness that a body maintained when it was still rationing its resources. "Scrambled or over easy?" he asked. "Scrambled?" A pause. "With cheese?" "Obviously." She almost smiled. That was something. He set the plate in front of her, poured her orange juice, no pulp, the way she'd always insisted, even when she was 4, and sat across from her with his coffee. He watched her eat with the mechanical focus of someone who was hungry but not enjoying it yet, and he thought about inflammatory markers and insurance networks and doctors who kept saying, "Let's monitor it." "Dad," Lily said, not looking up from her plate. "Yeah. Can I go to Maya's on Saturday?" "Depends on how you feel Saturday." She accepted this. It was how most of their conversations about plans went now. Depends on how you feel. She'd stopped arguing with that qualifier about 4 months ago. That was the part he couldn't shake. His 7-year-old had accepted contingency as a permanent condition of her life, and he hadn't been able to do a single useful thing about it. He drove her to school, watched her go through the gate with her backpack on the left shoulder, never the right, and then sat in the parking lot for a few minutes doing nothing in particular. Then he drove to Station 7 for his shift. Darnell was waiting for him in the bay, leaning against the ambulance with a coffee and an expression that was caught between impressed and amused. "The man himself," Darnell said. "Don't." "You didn't tell me." "There was nothing to tell." Nathan pulled his gear from his locker. "I stopped at an accident. I helped someone out of a car. That's it." "That's it," Darnell repeated, like he was testing the weight of the phrase. "Out of a burning car, while it was on fire." That's what burning means, yeah. "The woman is Celeste Sterling." "I know." Darnell straightened up. "How do you know? You know who she is?" "I read the article this morning." Nathan, brother, that's... Do you know how much that woman is worth? That's not the point. He was checking his kit, not looking up. It might be some of the point. It's not. Darnell was quiet for a second. Nathan knew he was doing the calculation that anyone in his position would do, thinking about the house on Birchwood Lane and the medical bills and the lawyer letters that Nathan had mentioned exactly once, 6 months ago, in a moment of weakness that he immediately regretted. You could at least call her, Darnell said. Let her say thank you. She doesn't owe me anything. She's alive, man. You pulled her out of a burning car. She kind of owes you something. Nathan closed the kit. Can we work now? They worked. It was a Thursday shift. 3 calls in 6 hours, 1 cardiac, 1 fall at an assisted living facility on Capitol Hill, 1 adolescent male with a dislocated knee from a skateboard incident who was simultaneously miserable and oddly proud of himself. Standard inventory of human fragility. Nathan moved through all of it with the particular focus that made him good at his job. The ability to be entirely present in the immediate problem while keeping everything else walled off behind a door he didn't open during working hours. He'd built that wall a long time ago. It had served him well in the Navy. It served him reasonably well now. What it didn't do, and had never done, was make anything better on the other side of it. The call came 7 days after the accident, not to his cell phone. He hadn't given her his number and she hadn't asked for it, but to Station 7's non-emergency line, which was publicly listed and which Darnell answered on a Wednesday afternoon and came to find Nathan with a very specific expression on his face. There's a woman on the phone, Darnell said. She says her name is Celeste Sterling and she'd like to speak with Nathan Cross. Nathan looked at him over the hood of the ambulance where he was doing a routine supply check. Tell her I'm busy. Darnell's expression didn't change. She said you might say that. She said she'll hold. A long moment. She'll hold, Nathan repeated. She sounds very calm about it. Nathan set down the inventory clipboard, walked into the station, to the desk phone, picked up the receiver. This is Cross. Mr. Cross. Her voice was clear and direct without the hesitancy he might have expected. No preamble. This is Celeste Sterling. You saved my life last week. I helped you out of a car. The medics on scene saved your life. A brief pause. That's an interesting way to look at it. It's an accurate way. I've been trying to find you since Thursday. I didn't make it difficult to find. No, she agreed. You didn't. I'd like to meet with you in person. I think I owe you that much. Nathan picked up a pen, put it down. You don't owe me anything, Ms. Sterling. With respect. I know I don't owe you anything in a transactional sense. I'd still like to. Another pause, shorter. I'm in Seattle through Saturday. If you're willing. He stood there, holding the receiver, looking out through the station window at the gray mid-morning sky. You don't have to do this. That was the logical voice. The one that had gotten him through 12 years of situations where the sensible play was clear and available. She's alive and you made it out, and there's no reason to make this into anything more than what it was. Friday afternoon, he said. I picked my daughter up at 3. Before that. Of course. Name a place. He named a coffee shop on Pike that was close to the station and unremarkable, deliberately, not because he'd thought about it much, but because picking an unremarkable place was just habit, and gave her a time and hung up. Went back to his inventory check. Darnell materialized at the other end of the ambulance as if he'd been waiting there the whole time. Well, he said. Mind your business, Nathan said, but without any real edge in it. Darnell smiled. That's a yes. She came alone. That was the first thing Nathan noticed when she walked into the coffee shop Friday at noon. No assistant, no security detail, none of the apparatus he'd half expected. Just a woman in dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater with her arm in a sling, her face showing the faded remains of bruising under makeup that wasn't quite covering it, moving through the Friday lunch crowd with the kind of self-contained purpose that didn't require space to be cleared ahead of it. She spotted him immediately. He'd taken a corner table with his back to the wall. Old habit, one he'd stopped trying to break. She slid into the seat across from him and nodded once, like they were resuming a meeting rather than starting one. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? She thought about it seriously, which he appreciated. Someone who wanted to be thanked. I don't. I know, that's what I mean. She looked at him steadily. Her eyes were dark and direct, the same as he remembered from the roadway. And even with the bruising and the sling, she projected a quality that he'd seen in exactly two other kinds of people in his life. Officers who'd genuinely earned their rank, and people who'd built something hard from scratch. The quality of someone who was used to the room adjusting to them, not the other way around. The coffee arrived. He'd ordered already. She ordered an Americano, no sugar, and when the server left, she put both hands, the good one and the slinged one, arranged carefully on the table and said, I want to help you, financially, whatever you need. No. You haven't heard the amount. It doesn't matter what the amount is. She tilted her head slightly, not annoyed exactly, but recalibrating. Why not? Nathan looked at his coffee, thought about how to say it in a way that didn't come out self-righteous, because he wasn't trying to be. Because accepting money from someone I helped changes what that was, and I don't want it changed. Celeste was quiet for a moment, then she said, That might be the most inconvenient answer I've ever received. The door to the coffee shop opened, and a gust of Seattle October came in with a couple who was loudly disagreeing about something, and in the moment of ambient noise that followed, Nathan's phone went off. He looked at it. Lily's school. Ridgecrest Elementary. I need to take this. She waved her good hand. He stepped to the side, answered. It was the school nurse, a woman named Patricia, whom Nathan had spoken to more times than he could count, and her voice had the particular careful cadence of someone who was used to delivering unwelcome information. Lily had had an incident. She'd been playing at recess, just walking, really, nothing strenuous, when the shoulder pain had come on sudden and severe. She was in the nurse's office now. She was asking for him. I'm on my way, he said. He was already moving toward the table to get his jacket. Celeste watched him come back. I have to go, he said. I'm sorry. My daughter. Something shifted in her expression, not dramatically, but perceptibly. Is she all right? He stopped. He didn't know why he stopped. She's been dealing with a medical situation. She needs me. Of course. Celeste was already starting to stand, adjusting the sling. Go, please. He pulled on his jacket, looked at her for a moment. This woman he'd pulled out of a fire, who'd come here to try and give him money he wouldn't take, who was looking at him right now with something that wasn't pity and wasn't exactly sympathy either, but was something adjacent that he couldn't quite name. I appreciate you coming, he said. I mean that. I'm glad you're alive. She opened her mouth to say something. His phone went off again. Ridgecrest Elementary. He went. Lily was sitting on the narrow vinyl bed in the nurse's office with her knees pulled up, and Clementine, she'd started bringing the rabbit to school in her backpack 3 weeks ago, something she would have considered babyish 6 months earlier, pressed against her chin. The fluorescent light made everything look slightly worse than it was. When Nathan walked in, she looked up, and the expression that crossed her face was the expression of every child who has been scared alone and then sees the person they most trust. A pure, unguarded release of held breath. Hey, Bug. Hey. Her voice was small. He sat beside her on the bed, did the thing he always did. Careful with the right side, arm around her narrow shoulders, her head finding his chest. Patricia the nurse gave them a moment and quietly stepped out. It came on fast? He asked. We were just walking to the swings, Lily said. I wasn't even doing anything. I know. Maya said maybe I was faking. She said it in a flat tone that was trying very hard to be casual. I'm not faking. I know you're not. He pressed his chin to the top of her head. Maya's 7. 7-year-olds say dumb things sometimes. Lily was quiet for a second. Then, when is it going to stop, Daddy? He didn't answer right away. He made himself find an answer that was true. I don't know, he said, but I'm working on it, okay? I'm not done working on it. She thought about this with the seriousness she applied to most things. Okay, she said finally, like she'd decided to extend credit. He signed her out, got her in the truck, stopped at the pharmacy for a children's ibuprofen that he already knew wouldn't do much more than take the edge off, and was halfway home when his phone, hands-free through the truck's Bluetooth, connected to an incoming call. The number was unknown. He almost let it go to voicemail. Cross, he answered. A brief pause. Then, Mr. Cross, this is Celeste Sterling again. I'm sorry to call. I got this number from the station directory. I have a question and then I'll leave you alone. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily was looking out the window watching the trees go past. What's the question? Your daughter, Celeste said. What's wrong with her shoulder? The directness of it caught him sideways. He hadn't expected that. Why? Because I own 4 medical technology companies, she said. And I have access to specialists that most people don't. And I watched your face when you left that coffee shop, and it wasn't the face of someone dealing with something manageable. A pause. I'm not trying to buy you. I'm asking a question. Nathan drove. Beside him, reflected in the window, he could see Lily's face in profile. The careful, practiced stillness of it. The way she'd learned to hold herself. Post-surgical shoulder pain, he said finally. 14 months. Her doctors can't get ahead of it. A silence on the line. Then, would you let me make a call? He thought about the insurance network. The specialist who had shrugged. The billing department. The phrase, let's monitor it, delivered 14 times in 14 months, in 14 different tones of professional compassion. He thought about Lily asking him when it was going to stop. What kind of call? He asked. The kind that gets you an appointment at Seattle Children's Advanced Care Division by next Wednesday, Celeste said. No cost, no strings. Just let someone who actually knows what they're looking at look at it. In the rearview mirror, Lily had turned from the window and was watching him drive with those dark eyes. His wife's eyes, the same shape and the same quality of attention, and wasn't saying anything because she'd learned that when Daddy was on the phone about the shoulder, the best thing to do was wait. Nathan Cross, who did not ask for help, who had not asked for anything from anyone in the 3 years since his wife died, who had built the wall and maintained it and told himself it was enough. One call, he said. No promises on anything else. Understood, Celeste Sterling said. And that was how it started. The call Celeste made took 11 minutes. Nathan knew because he was sitting in the hospital parking lot with the engine running when she called him back, and he'd been watching the clock on the dash with the particular kind of attention you give to small things when the large things feel too big to look at directly. Lily was inside with Mrs. Kowalski, who had materialized again with her coat and her quiet competence and her $12 an hour presence that Nathan had come to rely on more than he liked to admit. 11 minutes. Then his phone lit up. Wednesday at 2, Celeste said. Dr. Anita Soren. She runs the Pediatric Orthopedic and Implant Specialist program at Seattle Children's. She's reviewed Lily's records. I had them pulled from your current provider with your release on file. I hope that's okay. And she wants to do a full evaluation. Nathan sat with that for a second. She reviewed the records already. She's thorough. It's been 4 hours. I asked her to prioritize. No apology in it, just fact. He looked through the windshield at the hospital entrance. The automatic doors sliding open and shut for a steady stream of people, each of them carrying their own weight in there. What did she say when she looked at the records? A pause that was half a beat too long. She said she'd like to do the evaluation before drawing conclusions, which meant something in the records had caught her attention. Nathan had been a medic long enough to know how doctors talked around things before they were certain. Wednesday, he said. 2 o'clock. I'll have a car. We'll drive ourselves. Another pause. Okay. Ms. Sterling. He stopped, tried again. Thank you for the call. You're welcome. A brief silence, the kind that had a shape to it. How is she tonight? He looked at the hospital entrance again. She's tired, he said, which was true and also smaller than the truth, and they both seemed to understand that. They hung up. Wednesday came with the kind of brittle October clarity that Seattle occasionally produced between storms. Sharp blue sky, cold enough to see your breath, the kind of morning that made everything look more defined than it probably was. Nathan drove Lily to the appointment with the radio off, which was how they both preferred it when things felt heavy. Lily was wearing her good jeans and a purple sweater she'd picked herself, which he took as a sign that she was trying. She held Clementine in her lap with her left hand and looked out the window and asked, partway through the drive, Is this doctor going to say the same thing? I don't know, Nathan said. The last one said inflammatory markers. She said it carefully, the way she always pronounced the medical words, precisely like she'd practiced. The one before that said post-surgical adjustment. I remember. They all say different things that mean the same thing. Nathan glanced at her, 7 years old. What do you think they mean? She thought about it seriously. That they don't know. He didn't say anything to that because she wasn't wrong. Seattle Children's Advanced Care Division was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like every hospital Nathan had ever been in. That particular combination of industrial cleaner and recirculated air and something underneath it that wasn't exactly antiseptic and wasn't exactly anxiety, but was probably both. And Dr. Anita Soren was waiting for them herself, which was the first sign that this appointment was going to be different. She was a compact Indian-American woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up into her gray-streaked hair and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned a long time ago that efficiency and patience were not opposites. She shook Nathan's hand and then crouched down to Lily's level, which most of the doctors they'd seen hadn't done, and said, "You must be Lily. I'm Dr. Soren. I hear you've been dealing with something pretty rough." Lily looked at her with the appraising directness of a child who had met a lot of doctors and had stopped being impressed by them. "For 14 months, she said. "I know." Dr. Soren held her gaze. "I read your whole file. All of it." She stood back up, addressed Nathan. "I want to do a full workup today. Blood panel, imaging, and I want to see the hardware." "The hardware?" Nathan repeated. "The implant. The titanium anchor used in her labrum repair." She said it evenly, in the tone of someone choosing words deliberately. "I have some questions about the device itself." The evaluation took 3 hours. Nathan sat in the waiting area for most of it. They let him come in for the imaging but asked him to step out for the blood draw and the physical assessment, which was standard, but the waiting was a different quality than the waiting he'd done in other hospitals. It had a specific weight to it. He bought a coffee from the machine down the hall, drank about half of it, threw the rest away. He called Darnell. "How's she doing?" Darnell picked up on the second ring. "Still in with the doctor." "This is the one Sterling set up?" "Yeah." A pause. "You doing okay?" Nathan looked at the middle distance. The wall across from him, pale institutional green, a framed print of a mountain landscape that no one had looked at in years. "Waiting." "Worst part," Darnell said. "Yeah." They stayed on the line without talking for a minute, which was the kind of friendship Nathan had with Darnell. 11 years of working the same ambulance routes, enough shared time in enough difficult rooms that silence between them was just comfortable. Then Darnell said he had to get back, and Nathan said he'd call later, and they hung up. Celeste called at 3:15. Nathan answered it without thinking about whether he wanted to. "They're still running tests." "I know, doctor. Soren's office let me know the appointment was running long. I just wanted to check in." A brief pause. "You don't have to give me details. I'm just checking in." He looked at the mountain print. "Lily asked me this morning if this doctor was going to say the same thing as the others." "What did you tell her?" "That I didn't know." He shifted in the chair. "She's figured out that the different diagnoses all mean the same thing, that nobody knows what's actually wrong." Celeste was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was a degree quieter than before. "She sounds like a very perceptive kid." "She's too perceptive. She notices everything." He stopped. "She noticed that I stopped cooking her mother's recipes about a year ago and asked me if it was because it made me sad. She was 6. The words came out before he'd made a decision to say them. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the quality of Celeste's silence. She didn't fill it up with something reflexive, didn't immediately say, "I'm so sorry," just held it, which was unusual. "What did you tell her?" Celeste asked. "I told her, yeah, a little bit, and she said..." He stopped again, cleared his throat. "She said we should still make the pasta sometimes because it was her mom's too, and it wasn't fair that we both lost it." He looked at his hands. "Then she went back to watching cartoons," Celeste said very quietly. "She's right." "Yeah," Nathan said. "She usually is." Dr. Soren came to find him at 4 o'clock. She walked him into a small consultation room off the waiting area, not the main office, which told him something, and set Lily up in the adjacent room with a tablet and headphones and what appeared to be a significant quantity of graham crackers. Lily accepted these arrangements with the stoicism of someone who had been in a lot of consultation rooms. Doctor, Soren sat across from Nathan and put a folder on the table between them. I want to start by saying that I'm not ready to give you final conclusions today, she said. I need to run 2 more specific tests on her blood work, and I want to consult with a colleague who specializes in device-related complications. But I want to tell you what I'm looking at because I think you've been waiting long enough. Nathan looked at the folder. Tell me. The titanium anchor used in Lily's surgery. The specific device is a product called the OrthoSecure Flexi Anchor, manufactured under the Meridian Apex Medical Device subsidiary. She said the name of the manufacturer the way people said names that were going to be important, distinctly, giving him time to register it. It's been on the market for about 3 years and is commonly used in pediatric labrum repairs. The reason I want to consult a specialist is that I've seen Lily's blood panel and her titanium ion levels are elevated. Nathan went very still. What does that mean? It can mean several things, and I don't want to jump ahead. But in the context of a titanium implant that's been in place for 14 months, in a growing child who is experiencing persistent unexplained pain, elevated inflammatory markers, and now elevated metal ion levels in her blood work, it suggests that the implant itself may be the source of the problem. Dr. Soren looked at him steadily. There's a condition called adverse local tissue reaction, ALTR. It occurs when certain implant materials degrade at a higher rate than expected, releasing particles into the surrounding tissue. In pediatric patients, because growth puts additional stress on hardware, you can see corrosion patterns that wouldn't occur in adults. Nathan was listening in that way he'd learned in the Navy, taking in every word, not reacting, filing it into sequence. The OrthoSecure device, he said. Is there a known problem with it? A pause. The kind that answered the question before the words did. I've seen 2 other cases in the last 18 months with a similar presentation, Dr. Soren said carefully. Both involved the same device. In both cases, device removal resulted in significant symptom relief. Removal, Nathan said. Replacement surgery. Yes. She kept her voice level. It's not a minor procedure, but it's also not highly complex. The risk profile in a healthy child Lily's age is manageable. She paused. I want to be honest with you, Mr. Cross. I'm flagging this internally, and I'm going to be making some calls. The pattern I'm seeing concerns me beyond just Lily's individual case. Nathan sat with this for a long moment. Outside the door, he could hear the faint, tinny sound of whatever Lily was watching on the tablet, something animated, cheerful, completely disconnected from this room. How long has she been in pain because of the implant? He asked. Not loudly. Just the question. Doctor. Soren didn't look away. Based on what I'm seeing in her records, the symptom onset and progression, I would estimate that the device began showing signs of failure within 3 to 4 months of implantation, which would put the onset of device-related symptoms at roughly almost the whole time, Nathan said. A small nod. He looked at the folder on the table. 14 months. The phrase, let's monitor it, played in his head in a loop. And underneath it, the specific sound of Lily crying in the night. The thin, exhausted kind. The kind that had run out of tears. And he felt something happening in his chest that he wouldn't have called anger yet because it was too big and too formless to have a name. What do I do now? He asked. Let me run the remaining tests and consult my colleague. I'll have a clearer picture by Friday. If the results confirm what I'm seeing, I'll recommend a surgical consult for device removal. She reached across and opened the folder, turned it toward him. I want you to look at this. It's the product specification sheet for the OrthoSecure Flexi Anchor, specifically this section. She pointed. He looked. The section she was pointing to was a table, material composition, corrosion resistance ratings, recommended patient population. A line about 2/3 down was highlighted in yellow. Not recommended for patients under 12 years in high-growth phases without additional monitoring protocol. Nathan looked at this for a long time. She was 7 when she had the surgery, he said. 6, Dr. Soren said quietly. She was 6 years and 4 months. The sound from the tablet in the next room was still cheerful, still completely disconnected. Nathan closed the folder. He drove home in a different kind of silence than the mornings, not the heavy but familiar weight of a hard situation, but something with more edge to it, something that required careful management. Lily fell asleep in the passenger seat 20 minutes in, Clementine tucked under her chin, the late afternoon light coming through the window in long October angles across her face. He called Celeste from the driveway after he'd carried Lily inside and got her settled. She picked up before the second ring. He told her what Dr. Soren had said. Not all of it. Not the part about the highlighted specification sheet, not yet, but the shape of it, the implant, the metal ions, the other cases, the recommendation building towards surgery. Celeste listened without interrupting, which was the quality he was starting to recognize as characteristic of her. She didn't perform listening, didn't make sounds to demonstrate she was following along, just actually listened. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. The device manufacturer, she said. Meridian Apex subsidiary. A longer silence this time. I know the company, Celeste said. Her voice had changed register slightly. Not dramatically. She kept things controlled in a way that he'd noticed was fundamental to how she operated. But there was something underneath it now that hadn't been there before. Do you? Nathan said. Meridian Apex is one of my holdings. She said it the way you said something you were making yourself say. I acquired it approximately 2 years ago as part of a larger portfolio acquisition. The Ortho Secure line was already in production. Nathan said nothing for a moment. He was sitting on the couch in the living room, in the dark, not having turned any lights on when he came back inside. Were you aware of any safety concerns with the device? He asked, and his voice came out flat and careful, the way voices went when he was actively managing something. No. Immediately, clearly. I was not. Would you tell me if you were? A pause. I would like to think so. I understand why you're asking the question. I'm asking because my daughter has been in pain for 14 months, and your company made the thing that's been sitting inside her shoulder causing it. The sentence landed in the silence between them and sat there. I know, Celeste said, and then, after a moment, I'm going to make some calls of my own. Ms. Sterling, not to protect anything, she said, with a sharpness that came and went quickly, like she'd let something through and caught it. To find out what I should have been told and wasn't. There's a difference. Nathan looked at the dark living room. Lily's backpack by the door, the drawings on the refrigerator he could barely see from here, a purple raincoat on the hook that was one size too small and had been for 2 months, but she refused to stop wearing because it had a dinosaur patch on the sleeve that she'd picked herself. Friday, he said, when Dr. Soren has the full results. Friday, Celeste agreed. They met on Friday at a coffee shop again, but a different one. This time it was her suggestion, a quieter place in Eastlake with high ceilings and the kind of ambient noise that made conversation private without requiring effort. She was there before him, both hands around a mug, the sling gone now, and replaced by a careful way of holding her right arm slightly away from her body that told him the shoulder was still being managed. He sat down. There was already a coffee waiting across from her. He looked at it. You ordered for me, he said. Black, 2 sugars. I asked Darnell. A brief small movement around her mouth that wasn't quite a smile. He was cooperative. I'll have words with him. Don't. He cares about you. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Dr. Soren called me this morning before she called you as a courtesy, because I'd made the initial referral. She said she's recommending surgical consultation. She called me an hour later, Nathan said. I know. Celeste nodded. She was looking at the table, at her mug, not at him, which was unusual for her. The looking away. He'd noticed she was direct by default. I spent the last 2 days reviewing everything I could access about the Ortho Secure line, she said. Our performance reports, complaint logs, the manufacturing quality records, the FDA submission data. Nathan waited. There were flags, she said, in the complaint logs. 3 pediatric cases over the past 16 months with presentations similar to Lily's, elevated metal ions, persistent pain, symptoms consistent with device degradation. She finally looked up. Those reports were categorized as isolated incidents and escalated to the device quality team for monitoring. Monitoring, Nathan said. Monitoring. The word sat differently in her mouth than it did in his, but he could hear that she heard it, the echo of it, the particular inadequacy of it. The reports didn't reach me. They were handled at the subsidiary operations level. A pause. I've been trying to determine whether that was an oversight or a choice. What do you think it was? She looked at him steadily. I think someone made a calculation, she said, about what a recall would cost versus what continued monitoring would cost. And I think the person who made that calculation believed I would not want to know the answer. Nathan drank his coffee, set it down. Because knowing would mean a recall, he said, which would cost the subsidiary approximately $40 million in the first quarter alone, not including liability exposure. Her voice was very even. There's a significant contract renewal coming up with a national hospital network. A recall would kill it. So they buried it. I believe so. She said it without flinching, but her hands had tightened around the mug. I don't have full confirmation yet. My legal team is working through the document trail. Nathan looked at her for a moment. The bruising on her face had faded to almost nothing. She looked rested and composed, and also, underneath both of those things, genuinely angry in a way she was keeping in a very specific container. What are you going to do about it? He asked. What I should do is turn everything over to federal regulators and initiate a voluntary recall immediately. She said it without hesitation, which told him it wasn't a new conclusion. What my board is going to tell me is that I should wait for legal to complete its review, protect the company's position, and explore a structured resolution. And I think the board is going to have a very bad couple of weeks, Celeste said quietly. For the first time since this had started, Nathan felt something in him that wasn't frustration or exhaustion or carefully managed fear. Something that was closer to, he wasn't sure what to call it, not trust exactly. More like the recognition of a quality he respected when he saw it. You need to know something, he said. She waited. The specification sheet for the device. Dr. Soren showed me. It has a notation, not recommended for patients under 12 in high-growth phases without additional monitoring protocol. A stillness came over Celeste's face. Lily was 6, Nathan said. I know how old she was. And there it was. The container cracking, just slightly. Her jaw tightened. The surgical teams that use our devices receive product training. They should have... She stopped, started again. The hospital that performed her original surgery should have flagged that. They should have, Nathan agreed. But they had paperwork from your company's sales team saying the device was appropriate for pediatric use without restriction. I found it in her file this week. It's dated 4 months before her surgery. The silence that followed was different from the others. Celeste put her mug down very carefully, like she was being deliberate about not doing something else with her hands. Show me, she said. He pulled out his phone, pulled up the photo he'd taken of the document, slid it across the table. She looked at it for a long time. Her face did something complicated that she didn't try to cover. That's our letterhead, she said. Yeah. That document did not come from our medical affairs team. The language is wrong. We don't write indications that way. She was still looking at the screen. Someone in sales created this. Or someone told someone in sales to create it. She looked up. Their eyes met across the table, across the coffee cups, across the 14 months and the burning car and all the distance between their lives that was both very large and, in this moment, strangely small. I'm going to need that document, she said. Dr. Soren already sent it to her contact at the FDA. He picked his phone back up. But I'll forward you the photo. She nodded slowly. Then she looked away, out the window at the Friday afternoon traffic on Eastlake, and something moved across her face that wasn't quite any one thing. Not guilt exactly, because she hadn't done it, but maybe what guilt felt like when it arrived by proximity, when you were the structure under which a wrong thing had lived without your knowing it. I need to ask you something, Nathan said. All right. The night of the accident. You were on I-5 northbound in a storm, moving too fast for the conditions, late on a Thursday night. Where were you coming from? She turned back from the window. The question clearly wasn't what she'd expected. A late meeting. Why? What kind of meeting? A beat. A board meeting. At the Meridian Apex offices. She paused. The quarterly operations review. Nathan looked at her. The Ortho Secure line was on the agenda, she said, very quietly. The Q3 performance numbers. I was reviewing the device category. He sat with this. You were coming from a meeting about the same device, he said, that was sitting in my daughter's shoulder. I didn't know about Lily then. Her voice was even, but something behind it was not. I didn't know about any of the pediatric cases. The complaint flags weren't presented to me. I was looking at revenue numbers and market penetration data and a chart showing hospital network adoption rates. The coffee shop continued its ambient hum around them. Someone at the counter was laughing about something. I know you didn't know, Nathan said finally. She looked at him. You're being more generous than you should be. I'm not being generous, I believe you. He picked up his coffee, set it back down without drinking it. What I'm trying to figure out is the shape of it. The accident, the rescue, you turning up at my station, Lily. He looked at the window, the traffic. It keeps going in directions I didn't expect. It keeps going in directions I didn't expect either, Celeste said. They sat there for another half hour, talking through the document trail, the recall timeline, what Dr. Soren had said about surgical options. It was practical and specific, and underneath it was the other thing. The thing neither of them named directly, which was that the story of how they'd come to be sitting across from each other in this coffee shop was deeply improbable, and also, somehow, not finished. When Nathan finally stood to leave, Celeste said, How does she feel about hospitals? Lily, going back in for surgery. He thought about Lily asking if this doctor would say the same thing as all the others. He thought about her holding Clementine and waiting and being 7 years old and tired. She's braver than I am, he said. She always has been. Celeste looked at him for a moment, and he could see her doing what he'd watched her do before. Processing, weighing, not rushing it. She gets that from someone, she said. Nathan put on his jacket. Her mother, he said. Her mother was the brave one. He said it without a catch in his voice, which still surprised him sometimes. The way grief could reshape itself from something that stopped your throat to something you could carry in your hands and show people, if the moment was right. He left the coffee shop, walked to his truck in the cold afternoon air, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. His hand had fully healed. The cut from the windshield was a thin line now, almost invisible. He pressed his thumb along it without thinking about it, a habit he'd developed, like a soldier checking his equipment. The shape of things was becoming clearer, not comfortable, not anything close to comfortable, but clearer. And Nathan Cross, who had navigated by clarity through the worst nights of his life, understood that knowing the shape of a thing was the beginning of being able to do something about it. He started the engine and drove home to his daughter. The surgical consult was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and in the 4 days between the Friday coffee shop and that appointment, Nathan did something he hadn't done in a long time. He started digging. It wasn't a conscious decision, exactly. It was more like the part of him that had spent 12 years in the Navy learning to read a situation, to identify the seams in a story where things didn't line up, to follow the thread that someone else had tried to bury. That part had been quietly waking up since the moment Dr. Soren pointed to the highlighted line in the specification sheet. And by Saturday morning, while Lily was at the kitchen table working on a school project about ocean animals with Clementine sitting on the table beside her like a supervisor, Nathan was at his laptop doing what he'd been trained to do. He started with what he had. The falsified sales document suggesting the Ortho Secure device was appropriate for unrestricted pediatric use. The product specification sheet with the contradicting language. Lily's medical records, which he'd now read so many times that he could recite the lab values from memory. Dr. Soren's verbal summary of the 2 other pediatric cases she'd encountered. From there, he worked outward. The FDA's public database of medical device adverse event reports was accessible to anyone who knew where to look. Nathan found it. He searched the Ortho Secure Flexi Anchor by product code, filtered for pediatric patients, sorted by date. What came back was not what the Meridian Apex complaint logs had described as 3 isolated incidents. There were 11 reports, spanning 22 months, 7 of them in the last year. Each one told a version of the same story in the dry, clinical language of regulatory filings. Elevated metal ion levels, persistent unexplained pain, tissue inflammation, delayed recognition of device-related causation. In 3 cases, The patients had already undergone revision surgery. In two of those, the filing noted that the original surgical team had been provided with marketing documentation from the manufacturer describing the device as appropriate for broad pediatric application. Nathan printed every page. He had a printer in the second bedroom that he used maybe 4 times a year, and it protested the workload with sounds of mechanical grievance, and Lily came to stand in the doorway in her socks and look at him. "What are you printing?" "Work stuff." She looked at the growing stack of paper with the focused skepticism of a child who understood that work stuff on a Saturday was a specific category of thing. "Is it about my shoulder?" He looked at her. She looked back at him with those eyes that missed nothing. "Some of it," he said. She nodded, like this was what she'd expected, and went back to her ocean animals. He called Celeste at noon. She answered on the first ring, which he'd noticed was a pattern. She picked up quickly, without the performative delay that some people used to signal they were busy and important. "Tell me what you found," she said before he'd said anything except her name. "How do you know I found something?" "You called on a Saturday. You didn't text first." A brief pause. "You strike me as someone who texts first when it's casual." He didn't respond to that observation, which was accurate. 11 FDA adverse event reports for the OrthoSecure Flexi Anchor, pediatric patients, spanning almost 2 years. Silence. 11, she said. 7 in the past 12 months. The rate is accelerating. He looked at the stack of paper on the desk. Your subsidiary's complaint log showed 3. I know what it showed. Celeste. He'd started using her first name at some point in the last week without deciding to. Those 11 reports are public record. Anyone in your device quality team who was looking at complaint patterns would have had access to the same database. I know, she said. Her voice was flat in the way that meant she was controlling something significant. So either they looked and didn't tell you, or they didn't look, or they looked and actively made sure you wouldn't find it. I know, Nathan. Quieter now. I know what it means. He let it sit for a second. Outside his window, the neighbor's dog was doing something to a pile of leaves with great enthusiasm and 0 results. I found something else. The 2 cases where the falsified marketing documents were noted in the FDA filing. I cross-referenced the dates those documents were allegedly provided to the surgical teams. Both dates fall after the device quality team would have flagged the first complaint internally. The silence this time had a different quality, heavier. They were still distributing the documents after they knew, Celeste said. Not a question. That's what the timeline suggests. A long pause. He could hear her breathing, controlled, deliberate. I need those filings. I'm emailing them now. He heard her exhale. I've been on the phone with my legal team since Thursday morning. They're recommending I wait. Let them complete a full internal review before taking any action. They're talking about a process that takes 8 to 12 weeks. 8 to 12 weeks, Nathan said. I know. There are children in pain right now who have that implant. I know, Nathan, and there was something raw in it that she didn't smooth over. I know exactly what that means, and I know exactly what 8 to 12 weeks means for them. My lawyers are trying to protect the company from liability exposure. They're doing their jobs. Their jobs and the right thing are not the same thing in this situation. He picked up a page from the stack, one of the FDA filings. A 9-year-old girl from Phoenix, symptom onset 4 months post-surgery, 14 months of unexplained pain before revision surgery resolved it. He put it back down. What are you going to do? He asked. I'm working on that. A pause. How's Lily? The subject change was deliberate, but he didn't object to it. Some things needed to be sat with before they became decisions. He understood that. She's in the other room making a poster about anglerfish. Something that wasn't quite a laugh, but was adjacent. Of course she is. She's decided they're underappreciated. She's probably right. Another pause, and the texture of it was different, softer at the edges. Will you tell her that someone is working on fixing it? The shoulder. You don't have to say who. Nathan looked toward the hallway, toward the sound of markers on paper, and Lily talking quietly to Clementine about the specific grievances of deep-sea fish. Yeah, he said. I'll tell her. The surgical consult on Tuesday moved faster than any medical appointment Nathan had attended in the previous 14 months. Dr. Soren had prepared the ground. The consulting surgeon, a precise and unhurried man named Doctor, Wallace Chen had already reviewed the full case, already run his own assessment of the device data, and came into the room with a recommendation rather than a list of considerations. He laid it out with the directness Nathan appreciated in medical professionals who'd gotten comfortable enough with bad news to deliver it cleanly. The OrthoSecure device needed to come out. The revision surgery, replacing the compromised anchor with a different hardware system from a different manufacturer, was the appropriate intervention. The longer the degraded device remained in place, the greater the risk of permanent tissue damage to the surrounding structures. "How long can we wait?" Nathan asked. Dr. Chen looked at the imaging on the light board, then at Lily, who was sitting on the exam table with Clementine, listening with full attention. "I wouldn't go past 6 weeks. 4 would be better." "And after surgery, recovery?" 6 to 8 weeks for initial healing, physical therapy. She's young, which works in her favor. Pediatric tissue recovery is significantly faster than adult. If we move soon, I'm optimistic about full function. He looked at Lily directly when he said the last part, the way Dr. Soren had done, addressing her rather than around her. "You'd be able to use both arms again, normally, like before." Lily looked at him with careful consideration. "Would I be able to do monkey bars?" Dr. Chen's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. "Eventually, yes." "I haven't been able to do monkey bars for 14 months, Lily said. It was a statement of fact, delivered without drama. But in the particular quiet that followed it, Nathan felt the full weight of what 14 months meant. Measured in the currency of a 7-year-old's life. Not in insurance claims and medical records, but in missed monkey bars and recesses spent on the bench and birthday parties where she couldn't play the games everyone else was playing. He signed the surgical consent forms in the hallway after, while Lily waited inside with a nurse who had produced somehow a set of colored pencils and a sketch pad. Nathan's hand was steady. His jaw was not entirely. Dr. Chen watched him sign. "She'll be all right, Mr. Cross. I've done this specific revision procedure 11 times. I've not had a bad outcome." "I appreciate that." Nathan capped the pen. "I need to ask you something off the record." The surgeon waited. "Are you aware of other cases with this device?" A pause. Dr. Chen looked at the consent forms, then at Nathan. "Dr. Soren and I have been in contact about that question." "That's not a no." "No," Dr. Chen said quietly. "It's not." Nathan drove home thinking about 11 FDA filings and the chart in his head that showed the acceleration of reported incidents over 22 months, and the sales document with the Meridian Apex letterhead, and the executives at the quarterly operations review who had looked at revenue numbers and market penetration data while his daughter cried herself awake in the night. The anger that had been formless in Dr. Soren's consultation room was finding its edges now, the way water found the shape of whatever held it. He called Celeste from the hospital parking lot, the same spot he'd called from before. The symmetry of it was not lost on him. She answered immediately. "How did it go?" "She needs surgery within 4 weeks. Dr. Chen recommends sooner." He looked at the hospital entrance. "I signed the consent." "Okay." Her voice was steady. "Okay. I'll have my office coordinate with Dr. Chen's team on scheduling. If it's within my hospital network access, I can ensure the surgical costs are—" "Celeste." A pause. "We'll talk about costs later," he said. "Right now I want to tell you what I found this weekend, and I want to know what you're going to do about it. Because I've been patient, and I've been reasonable, and I have 4 weeks before my daughter goes into surgery to fix something that should never have been inside her." A beat of silence. Then, "Where are you?" "Hospital parking lot." "Don't drive yet. Give me what you found." He gave her all of it. The 11 FDA filings, the accelerating timeline, the cross-referenced dates showing the falsified marketing documents being distributed after the first internal complaint flags. He read her the specific language from 2 of the filings, the clinical descriptions of children in pain, and she didn't interrupt him once. When he finished, the silence lasted long enough that he checked the connection. "I'm here," she said. "I'm just—" A brief stop. "I'm sitting with it." "Don't sit with it too long." "Nathan." Her voice had an edge now, not defensive exactly, but present. "I have been sitting in a conference room since 7 this morning with 4 lawyers and 2 board members who are telling me that initiating a voluntary recall without completing the internal review process exposes the company to an admission of liability that could result in judgments totaling somewhere between $300 million and $500 million. They are not wrong about the legal math. I understand the legal math. And I am also sitting with the fact that the man who pulled me out of a burning car is parked outside a hospital where his daughter just got scheduled for corrective surgery to fix something my company's executives covered up. Those two things are both real, and I'm trying to figure out how to move correctly. He didn't say anything for a moment. I'm not a patient man, he said finally. I know. A pause. I know you're not. But I need 48 hours to gather the specific documentation I need to move around the board. Can you give me 48 hours? He sat in the parking lot, engine off, looking at the hospital entrance. 48 hours, he said. He spent those 48 hours doing two things simultaneously. During the days, he worked his shifts at Station 7, moving through the inventory of Seattle's emergencies with the compartmentalized focus that had always been his best professional quality. During the nights, after Lily was in bed, he sat at the desk in the second bedroom and built the case. He was thorough in the way that years of military intelligence training made a person thorough, not scattered, not angry and reckless, but methodical. He organized the FDA filings chronologically, cross-referenced them against the internal complaint log dates he'd gotten from Celeste, mapped the document trail for the falsified marketing materials against the product launch timeline. He built a spreadsheet that was clear enough that anyone, a journalist, a federal investigator, a jury, could follow it from one end to the other without needing specialized knowledge. He wasn't sure yet what he was going to do with it, but having it felt important. Having it meant that whatever happened in the next 48 hours, the shape of the thing existed somewhere outside of the people who had an interest in keeping it shapeless. Darnell called him on the second night at 10:30. "You're still up," Darnell said. Not a question. He could hear the particular quality of Nathan's voice when he'd been thinking hard for too many consecutive hours. "Working." "The shoulder thing?" "Yeah." A pause. "You want to talk through it?" This was another thing about Darnell. He never pushed, just offered the door and left it open. "I found documentation showing the manufacturer's executives knew about the device failure pattern and kept marketing it anyway. To hospitals, to surgical teams, who then put it into kids." Darnell was quiet for a moment. "How many kids?" 11 confirmed in the FDA database, probably more who haven't filed or haven't been correctly diagnosed yet. "And the company, the Sterling Woman's company. Her executives buried it." Nathan looked at the spreadsheet on his screen. "She says she didn't know. I believe her. But they did it in her name, with her resources, in a building with her company's sign on the door." "What's she gonna do?" "She said 48 hours. "How long ago was that?" Nathan looked at the clock. 31 hours. Another pause. "You trust her?" He thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. He thought about the coffee shop, both of them, the document on the table between them. The way she'd said "I know" when he told her about the falsified marketing literature, said it without flinching, without lawyering up her language. The way she'd asked how Lily was doing, not as a transition or a softening maneuver, but as if she actually wanted to know. "I think so," he said. "Yeah." "That's something," Darnell said. "It's not nothing." He was at Station 7 when she called, 16 hours after the conversation in the hospital parking lot. He stepped out to the bay, away from the ambient noise of the common room. "I need to see you," Celeste said. Her voice was different. The controlled quality still there, but pressed closer to the surface than usual, like the thing being controlled was pushing hard against it. "Not by phone, in person." "When?" "Now, if you can, or as soon as your shift ends." His shift ended at 3. It was 2:15. "I can take my meal break. There's a place on Western Avenue, Callahan's. Do you know it?" "I'll find it." She was at a corner table when he got there, 20 minutes later, and she'd clearly been there a while. There were 2 empty coffee cups in front of her and a laptop open that she closed when she saw him. She was wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, dark gray, and her hair was down, which was also different, and the overall impression was of someone who had been moving fast through a hard thing and hadn't had time to assemble the usual professional surface. He sat down, looked at her. "Tell me," he said. "I found it," she said. "All of it." She opened the laptop again, turned it to face him. My financial investigator spent 36 hours pulling internal communications. What I'm about to show you is the full scope of what they did. He leaned forward and read. The emails were between three men: Richard Harlow, the Meridian Apex subsidiary CEO, a man named Dennis Pratt, the VP of Device Quality, and the company's chief legal counsel, a woman named Sandra Oates. The thread spanned 8 months. The earliest email was from Pratt, flagging the first cluster of pediatric adverse event reports and recommending an internal safety review. Harlow's response was 11 words. Hold this. Don't escalate. I'll loop in Sandra and we'll manage. What followed was a paper trail of managed silence. Pratt's safety review was reclassified as a routine quality monitoring process. The FDA adverse event reporting that should have been triggered was described internally as premature given sample size. A proposed internal recall notice was drafted and then buried in a legal hold file. And the marketing documents, the falsified ones describing the device as appropriate for unrestricted pediatric use, were approved for continued distribution in an email from Harlow dated 5 months after the first safety flag. The email to the sales team distribution list was 3 sentences long. The OrthoSecure pediatric application materials are approved for Q3 hospital network rollout. Please ensure all regional reps have current versions. Surgery scheduling targets remain in effect. Nathan read it twice. He sat back in his chair. How many people knew? He asked. At the executive level, these 3 for certain. I'm still mapping the distribution below them. Celeste had her hands flat on the table, a stillness to her that was deliberate. I didn't know. I need you to know that I didn't know, not because I need you to feel sorry for me, but because it matters for what I'm going to do next. What are you going to do next? She looked at him directly. I'm calling the FDA this afternoon. I'm initiating a voluntary recall of the OrthoSecure Flexi Anchor effective immediately, and I'm turning this entire document package over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. She paused. My board is going to try to stop me. They may succeed in delaying the regulatory action through legal maneuvering, but they cannot stop me from handing evidence to federal investigators. What happens to you when you do that? The company's stock will drop. The board will move to remove me. The hospital network contract will almost certainly be canceled. She said each of these things in the flat tone of someone reading items off a list they've already processed. The liability judgments, when they come, will be significant. My personal assets are tied to the company in ways that mean significant personal financial loss. And Lily's surgery, Nathan said. If the company is in legal proceedings, her surgery is already scheduled, and the costs are already committed through a personal guarantee that has nothing to do with company funds. Her eyes didn't waver. That doesn't change. That was never contingent. He looked at her for a long moment. Why are you telling me before you do it? He asked. She seemed to think about how to answer this. Because you built the same case I built independently with less access, and you did it because your daughter is in pain and you couldn't find another way. She paused. And because the night of the accident, I asked you why you went into a burning car, and you said because you were in it. And I've been thinking about that answer for 3 weeks. She looked at the closed laptop. I think I'm doing this because the children are in it, and because I am still, technically, the person responsible for the structure that did this to them, regardless of what I knew or didn't know. That's just true. Nathan Cross, who had a professional familiarity with people doing hard things badly and people doing hard things well, recognized which category this was. When you call the FDA this afternoon, he said, I want to be on the call. She looked at him. Not to direct it, he said. He stopped. Tried again. I've been carrying this for 14 months, and I'd like to be in the room when it starts going the other direction. Celeste nodded slowly. I'll make it a conference call. And the document package you're turning over to the U.S. Attorney. I have my own copy, compiled independently. They'll want that, she said. Separate compilation, separate source, same conclusions. That matters. He checked his watch. He had 40 minutes before his meal break was over. He looked at the window, the gray November sky above Western Avenue, the ordinary city moving past outside with no particular awareness that in this corner table conversation, something was being set in motion that was going to matter to a lot of people who didn't know yet that they needed it to. Can I ask you something? He he said. You can always ask. The night of the accident, when I got you out and you were on the ground, and I asked your name. You took a second before you answered. I thought you were confused from the impact, but that wasn't it, was it? Something moved across her face. No. You knew who you were and you were deciding whether to say. I was deciding whether my name was going to complicate things. A pause. Whether you'd treat me differently. Whether the help would be... She stopped. It was reflex. A bad one. I told you anyway. You did. You already knew what you were going to do regardless of the answer, she said. I could see that. That's why I told you. He thought about that night. The rain, the fire, the specific mathematics of the situation that had left no room for anything except action. He'd gone into that car because the alternative was standing on the shoulder watching someone die, and that had never been an option he was capable of choosing. It had nothing to do with who she was or what she was worth or what her name turned out to be. But he also understood now why the question had taken her a second. I'm going to be late back to the station, he said, and stood. She looked up at him. Nathan? A pause. When this goes public, and it'll go fast once I make the calls, it's going to get complicated. There will be lawyers and investigators and press, and your name is going to be in it as the first person who documented the pattern. I know. You don't have to be publicly involved. I can protect your name from the filings. He picked up his jacket. Don't. She watched him. I spent 14 months trying to find out what was wrong with my kid, and the answer was sitting in a public database the whole time because the people who were supposed to act on it decided not to. He shook his head. I don't want my name protected. I want it on the record. He left money on the table for the coffee, more than enough, and walked out into the gray November air. His phone showed 4 minutes left on his meal break if he drove fast. He drove fast. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, in a conference call that included Celeste, her personal attorney, and a senior compliance officer at the FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health, Nathan Cross sat in his truck in the parking lot of Station 7 with the engine off and listened to Celeste Sterling initiate the voluntary recall of the OrthoSecure Flexi Anchor and begin the process of reporting a coordinated internal suppression of safety data by named executives at the Meridian Apex subsidiary. He didn't say much. He answered 2 direct questions from the FDA officer about the independent documentation he'd compiled about the falsified marketing document in Lily's surgical records. His voice was even. His hands were on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, an old habit from long drives through places where you needed to be ready to move. When the call ended, he sat there for a while. He thought about Lily on the bench at recess, not playing. He thought about 14 months of let's monitor it. He thought about a 9-year-old girl from Phoenix in an FDA filing, 14 months of pain, the resolution line reading revision surgery, symptoms resolved. He thought about the stack of printed pages in the second bedroom and the spreadsheet on his laptop and the email that said surgery scheduling targets remain in effect, sent 5 months after the first safety flag. He thought about a woman in a white silk blouse in a burning car, asking him why he went in. His phone buzzed. A text from Celeste. It started. Thank you. He looked at it for a moment, then put the phone in his pocket and went back inside to finish his shift. That evening, Lily was at the kitchen table doing homework when he got home. She looked up when he came in, assessed him the way she always did, reading the room from his face before she said anything, and then said, "Did something happen today?" "Yeah," he said, hanging his jacket. "Good something or bad something?" He went to the refrigerator, stood there for a second, then he turned around and looked at his daughter. 7 years old, Clementine on the table beside the homework, the purple sweater, the careful way she held her right arm. "Good something," he said. "Someone started fixing it." Lily looked at him for a long moment with those eyes that were her mother's. "The shoulder?" "The shoulder," he said, "and some other things." She thought about this seriously. Then she nodded, picked up her pencil, and went back to her homework. Nathan Cross stood in his kitchen and felt, for the first time in 14 months, that the ground under him had shifted in a direction that wasn't down. The recall went public 47 hours after the FDA call. Nathan found out the way most people found out about things they were already inside of. Not through the official channel, not from Celeste, but from Darnell, who texted him at 6:52 in the morning with a link and the message, "It's everywhere, man." He was making Lily's breakfast when the text came in. He read the article standing at the stove with the eggs going in the pan. And by the time he'd gotten through the third paragraph, the eggs were overdone on one side and he didn't care. The headline was straightforward. FDA issues Class 1. Recall for ortho. Secure Flexi Anchor Pediatric Implant. Meridian Apex Subsidiary. Faces federal investigation. The article had the basic shape right. The voluntary recall initiation, the safety data suppression allegations, the three named executives, but it was missing the interior architecture of how it had actually happened. Missing Nathan entirely, which was fine. Missing the specificity of what 14 months looked like from the inside, which was also fine because that specificity was not the point of a news article. The point was that it was out. He scraped the eggs onto a plate anyway, called Lily for breakfast, and watched her eat with the focused quiet of someone who hadn't slept well. The shoulder had been bad the past 2 nights. He could see it in the careful way she was sitting, the slight lean away from the right side. 12 days? He said. She looked up. Surgery is in 12 days. He poured her juice. Dr. Chen's office confirmed yesterday. Lily looked at her eggs, pushed them around a little. Will it hurt? After. Some. For a while. Different hurt than what you have now. Different how? He sat down across from her, thought about how to be honest in a way that was actually useful. The hurt you have now is your body fighting something that's wrong. After surgery, it'll be your body healing. Same amount of pain maybe, but it's going somewhere instead of just sitting there. She considered this with the seriousness she applied to most things. Okay, she said, which was Lily. Or I accept that explanation. I'm still scared. I'll manage. He dropped her at school, came back to the house, and found 3 missed calls. One from Dr. Soren's office confirming she'd been contacted by FDA investigators and wanted to connect Nathan with the case officer. One from a journalist at the Seattle Times who'd gotten his name from somewhere he hadn't figured out yet. One from a number he didn't recognize with a Seattle area code. He called Dr. Soren's office back first, confirmed he'd speak with the FDA case officer, got the contact information. Then he stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the journalist's number. He didn't call it, not yet. He called Celeste instead. She sounded like someone who had been awake for 36 hours and was operating on the compressed clarity that comes after you've passed through exhaustion and out the other side. You saw the coverage, she said. Yeah. How bad is it on your end? The board called an emergency session at 7 this morning. They're moving to initiate a vote of no confidence. A pause that was very short, which told him she'd already processed this and was past the part where it was news. My legal team has been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office since 5 a.m. Richard Harlow's personal attorney called my attorney at 6:30. Harlow, the subsidiary CEO. He's looking for an off-ramp. His attorney used the phrase cooperative resolution 3 times in a 4-minute call. Her voice had a dry, tired edge to it. It means he wants to minimize personal liability by getting ahead of the federal investigation. Is that going to happen? Not if I have anything to do with it. Flat and final. I handed the document package to the U.S. attorney personally, the communications between Harlow, Pratt, and Oates, the falsified marketing materials, the internal recall draft that was buried in a legal hold, all of it with timestamps, distribution records, and chain of custody documentation. A pause. They don't get a cooperative resolution. They get a federal case. Nathan looked out the kitchen window. The morning was overcast. The light that particular flat gray that Seattle wore for months at a stretch, and the maple in the backyard had dropped most of its leaves and was standing there looking skeletal and not particularly apologetic about it. The journalist from the Seattle Times called me, he said. I expected that. Others will follow. A brief pause. It's your choice entirely what you do with that. I want to be clear about that. I haven't directed any press toward you, and I won't. Say, I know. If you talk to them, it changes things. Your life gets more complicated for a while. My life's been complicated. More publicly complicated. A pause. With a 7-year-old in the middle of it? He'd thought about that already. had spent part of the previous night thinking about it while the spreadsheet was open on his screen, thinking about what it meant for Lily, specifically, to have her name and her situation in the press. She was already navigating enough. School, the shoulder, the way kids her age process things they didn't fully understand. "I'll talk to them after the surgery," he said, "after she's on the other side of it. Before that, my name can be in the record, but not in the press." That's smart. Something in the way she said it, not complimentary, just straightforward agreement, reminded him of the quality he'd noticed in the best officers he'd served under. The ones who could hear a decision and evaluate it on its merits without layering on their own ego. "How are you doing?" he asked, a silence that was half a beat longer than her usual pauses. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Another pause. "I'm processing the speed of it. I knew it was going to move fast once it started. Knowing and experiencing are different." A brief exhale. "My CFO resigned this morning. By email. He CC'd the board." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He was one of the people who knew." She said it without particular heat, just as fact. "I'm going to be fine. The company may not be in its current form. That's the right outcome given what was done with it." He understood what it cost to say that. Not financially. The financial cost was large, but it was also, in the end, just money. But the other cost. The thing you built. The shape it had in your mind when you were building it. And what it was supposed to be. "Celeste." He stopped. "Yeah. What you did, calling the FDA, turning over the documents, doing it before your board or your lawyers could build a wall around it. That was the right call." A pause. "I know. I'm saying it anyway." "I know you are." Something in her voice that he hadn't heard before. Something quieter and less managed than her usual register. "Thank you." They stayed on the line for a moment without either of them saying anything, which had become a thing between them. Silences that had company in them. Then her other line went. The board, probably. She said she had to go, and he said he knew, and they hung up. He called the FDA case officer. Her name was Agent Patricia Morse, and she was methodical and precise and treated his independently compiled documentation with the specific kind of attention that told him she understood its value. He spent an hour and 20 minutes on the phone with her, walking through the spreadsheet, the cross-reference dates, the advertising document chain. She asked good questions. He gave her complete answers. By the end of the call, she had everything he had, formally, on the record. "Mr. Cross," she said, before they hung up, "I want to tell you that the adverse event filing database you accessed and analyzed, the pattern you identified, is what triggered the internal escalation on our end when Ms. Sterling's submission came in. Your independent work confirmed a timeline that the internal communications alone wouldn't have established clearly." "Okay," he said. "I'm telling you because you should know that it mattered." He sat with that for a second. "There are kids who had this device implanted who haven't been diagnosed yet," he said. "Families who are where I was 6 months ago, getting told, let's monitor it. We're aware of that. The recall notice goes to every surgical facility that ordered the device. We're also pushing a physician advisory that specifically flags the presentation pattern, persistent pain, elevated metal ions, so that physicians with current patients can reevaluate. How many devices are we talking about? Total units distributed?" A pause. "That's still being determined as part of the investigation. The estimate from the initial recall scope documentation is approximately 800 units placed across a 32-month period." 800. Nathan did the math on the adverse event filings. 11 confirmed, 7 in the accelerated period. The confirmation rate on device-related complications in cases like this, based on what doctor Soren had told him, was typically a fraction of actual incidents. Patients misdiagnosed, symptoms attributed to other causes. Families who stopped pushing because the system kept telling them nothing was wrong. 800 units. "All right," he said. "Thank you for your time." He put the phone down and sat in the second bedroom, at the desk with the printer that had worked too hard, and looked at the stack of papers that was still there from the weekend. The 9-year-old from Phoenix, Lily's medical records, the FDA filing numbers, each one a child, each one a version of the same story told in clinical language. He was not a man who cried easily. He'd had exactly 3 experiences in his adult life that had broken through the wall far enough to produce actual tears. The day his daughter was born, the day his wife died, and one night in Kandahar that he still didn't talk about. This was not a 4th experience, but he sat there for a while doing nothing in particular, and the stack of papers was very present in the room with him. Then he got up, went to the kitchen, and started making lunch. The next 12 days had the compressed, pressurized quality of time moving too fast and too slow simultaneously. The investigation was accelerating. Celeste's board formally initiated the no-confidence vote on day 3, and by day 5 it was clear they had the numbers, and the legal maneuvering that followed was covered extensively in the business press in the language of corporate governance that Nathan mostly ignored except for the parts that were relevant to the recall timeline and the surgery. Doctor, Soren called on day 7 to tell him that the FDA case officer had now linked 31 confirmed adverse events to the OrthoSecure device. The number had nearly tripled in 72 hours as the recall notice prompted reevaluation of existing cases across the hospital network. 31 children. The number kept moving. Celeste called that same evening. She'd been calling most evenings, around 8, after Lily was in bed, a pattern that had established itself without either of them formally deciding it. The calls were practical, mostly. Updates on the investigation, the legal proceedings, the board situation, but they were also, increasingly, the other thing. The thing that neither of them was naming. The board vote is Friday, she said. They have the numbers. I'll be removed as CEO by end of business. Nathan was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. What happens after? I retain my equity stake, which will be worth significantly less than it is now by the time the liability judgments come through. The new board majority will appoint an interim CEO and try to negotiate a settlement structure that limits the company's exposure. A pause. They'll probably partially succeed. Corporate litigation is very good at distributing consequences in ways that protect structures. But Harlow and the others? The federal case is separate from the civil litigation. Harlow, Pratt, and Oates are looking at criminal exposure that the company's settlement negotiations can't absorb for them. Her voice was steady. They made their choices. Those choices have a federal address now. He turned the cold coffee cup in his hands. You could have let the board's process play out. 8 to 12 weeks, they said. You could have come out of it with the company intact, your position intact, a settlement structure that controlled the liability. I know. You chose not to. I know that too. A brief pause. I keep thinking about what you said, about the 9-year-old in the Phoenix filing, 14 months. Her voice was quiet. 8 to 12 weeks is a long time when you're measuring it in months of a child's pain. He didn't say anything for a moment. Lily packed her bag tonight, he said, for the hospital. She packed clementine and her colored pencils and a book about deep-sea fish. A pause. She asked me if the doctors would let her keep Clementine in the operating room. What did you tell her? I told her I'd make sure of it. Can you? I'll make sure of it. He said it the way he said things he was going to do regardless of what was technically permitted. She's been carrying that rabbit since she was 2. She's not going into surgery without it. A silence that had warmth in it. No, Celeste said quietly. She's not. He looked at the kitchen, the drawings on the refrigerator, Lily's backpack by the door, the purple raincoat with the dinosaur patch that still didn't fit and wasn't going anywhere, the ordinary geography of a house built around a child. Can I ask you something? He said. You can always ask. It was what she'd said the last time he'd started a question that way, in the coffee shop. He noticed she'd remembered it too, that she'd said it with the same phrasing, deliberate. When you came to Station 7 to find me, he said, the first time, you said you'd been trying to find me since Thursday. Yes. Why? A lot of people would have sent a check through a handler, a gift basket, a letter, something that didn't require this. He gestured at the phone, the space between them, all of it. A long pause. Because when I was in that car, she said, and I was genuinely not sure whether I was going to get out, I thought a specific thing, not about the company or the board or the contracts or any of it. Her voice was careful, measuring the words. I thought about a list of things I hadn't done that I should have. And then you came through the windshield and got me out, and afterward, lying on the wet asphalt, I thought, I have time now. I have time to do the things on the list. A pause. Finding the man who saved me and looking him in the face and saying thank you was the first thing on the list. I didn't want to outsource that. Nathan was quiet. That's a real answer, he said. I don't give other kinds. He believed her. He'd believed most of what she said, which was not his default position with people he'd known for less than 2 months, and he'd been turning that fact over in the back of his mind without quite examining it directly. The board vote is Friday, he said. Lily's surgery is Saturday morning. I know. That's a hard couple of days. Yes. A brief pause. I'll be in Seattle through the weekend. He turned the cold coffee cup again, looked at it, set it down. You don't have to be, he said. For Lily's surgery, you don't owe us. I know I don't owe you. A quiet firmness to it. I want to be available in case there's anything I can do, even if that's just being in the building. He thought about the hospital, the waiting room, the particular quality of time in a waiting room when someone you love is behind a set of doors you can't go through. I'm bad company when I'm waiting, he said. I don't need good company. I just need to be there. He considered it. The Nathan Cross who had come into November, the one who'd spent 3 years building the wall, who'd asked for nothing, who'd told himself that the unit of him and Lily was sufficient and complete and didn't need anything from the outside that he couldn't provide. That version of himself would have said that's not necessary and meant it. Okay, he said instead. Friday arrived with a cold front that turned the November rain into something almost sleet, and the board voted 8-3 to remove Celeste Sterling as CEO of the Meridian Apex parent company at 4:17 in the afternoon. She texted Nathan 2 words at 4:22. It's done. He was in the middle of making dinner, pasta, the shape of it chosen without conscious thought, just reaching for what he knew. And he read the text and wrote back, "You okay?" And she wrote back after a minute, "Working on it." He'd put the pasta on when his phone rang. Not Celeste, a number he didn't know, Chicago area code. He almost let it go. Then something made him answer. "Mr. Cross?" A man's voice, smooth and careful, the particular smoothness of someone used to managing conversations from the opening word. "My name is Gregory Falk. I'm representing Richard Harlow and the Meridian Apex executive team in the federal matter." Nathan stood at the stove with the pasta going. "I know who Harlow is." "Of course. Mr. Cross, I'll be direct with you. My clients are in discussions with the U.S. Attorney's Office about a cooperative framework, and part of that framework involves resolving the civil matters in a way that's beneficial to affected families." A brief pause calibrated for effect. "We understand your daughter is scheduled for surgery tomorrow morning. We'd like to make sure her medical costs and her recovery are fully covered, and that your family is compensated appropriately for what she's experienced. We're prepared to make a very generous offer." Nathan turned the heat down on the pasta. "What's the offer contingent on?" A pause. "We would ask that you and your family enter into a standard confidentiality agreement regarding the specifics of the case and your involvement with—" "No," Nathan said. "Mr. Cross, I haven't given you the— It doesn't matter what the number is." He said it the same way he'd said it to Celeste in the coffee shop the first day. And it was true the same way it had been true then. A confidentiality agreement means I stop talking. It means the 11 other families, or the 31 or whatever the number is now, they don't hear what I know. It means the public record gets quieter. He took the pasta off the heat entirely. "I'm not doing that." "Mr. Cross." The smoothness had acquired a slight additional quality, the faintest edge. "The surgery tomorrow is expensive. The recovery process will be—" "My daughter's surgery is covered," Nathan said. "Good night." He hung up, stood at the stove for a moment, then he called Celeste. She picked up fast. "We just got a call from Harlow's attorney," he said. "So did mine, 2 hours ago." He could hear something in her voice that wasn't quite anger, more like the specific exhaustion of being unsurprised by something you'd hoped not to see. "They're trying to build a settlement structure that includes confidentiality provisions. My attorney told them any settlement that silences affected families is a non-starter from my side. I told them no. I know you did. A pause. How's Lily tonight? He looked toward the hallway. From Lily's room, the small sounds of a 7-year-old doing pre-bedtime things. A drawer opening, the specific squeak of the closet door that he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months. She's pretending she's fine, he said. She's been very calm all day, which means she's holding it very tight. What do you do when that happens? I let her hold it until she decides to put it down. He leaned against the counter. She'll come out in a few minutes and ask me something totally unrelated to the surgery. Last night it was about why jellyfish don't have brains. The night before it was about whether dogs dream. A brief silence. What did you tell her about the jellyfish? That they don't need brains for what they do. They just move with the current, respond to what's around them, and it's enough. He paused. She thought about that for a while and then said she thought that sounded lonely. It does, Celeste said quietly. From the hallway, the specific sound of Lily's door and then her feet on the floor. And then she appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, the sauropod ones, with Clementine under her arm and an expression of studied casualness. Dad, she said. Yeah. Do fish sleep? He looked at her. Behind her eyes, underneath the studied casualness, the thing she was holding very tight. He recognized it because he'd been holding the same thing all day in the same way. Some of them, he said. Come here. She came and leaned against him, left side, the careful practiced lean that protected the right shoulder. He put his arm around her. She was warm and smelled like the strawberry shampoo she'd picked herself at the drugstore and was completely, entirely his entire world. Celeste, he said into the phone, I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be there, she said. He hung up and stood there in the kitchen with his daughter leaning against him. And outside the sleet had become actual sleet, tapping against the window in an irregular pattern, and the pasta was cold in the pot. But there was enough, and he'd reheat it, and they'd eat, and then he'd sit with Lily until she fell asleep, the way he did every night now. Not because she asked him to, but because he'd started doing it, and neither of them had moved to stop. Dad, Lily said. Yeah, I'm a little scared. I know, Bug. Is that okay? He pressed his chin to the top of her head. Outside the sleet kept at it, indifferent and steady, the way weather was. Yeah, he said. That's okay. I'm a little scared, too. She was quiet for a second. Then, really? Yeah. She seemed to find this comforting in the way that children found comfort in discovering their parents were human, not because fear was reassuring, but because shared fear was less isolating than being the only one who had it. Okay, she said. They stood there in the kitchen for another minute, the two of them, not saying anything. Then Lily said, The pasta's cold. I know. Can we have the cheesy kind, the stuff from the box? That's not real pasta. I know, she said. I want it anyway. He let her go, went to the cabinet, found the blue box that he kept in the back behind things, pulled it out. She climbed onto the kitchen chair and watched him start the water with the particular expression of someone who had won a small, comfortable victory and was trying not to make too much of it. He made the boxed pasta. They ate at the kitchen table. Lily talked about deep-sea fish, then about whether her teacher had a pet, then about a song that had been stuck in her head for 3 days that she couldn't quite remember all the words to. Normal, ordinary, entirely unremarkable conversation. The exact kind that Nathan had learned to understand as its own form of courage. At 9:15, he tucked her in. Clementine was on the pillow, already packed in the bag for tomorrow, but tonight she got one more night of normal deployment. 12 hours, Lily said, roughly. And then it starts going somewhere instead of just sitting there. He recognized his own words back. Yeah. She reached up with her left arm and grabbed his hand for a second, squeezed it, let go. Okay, she said. Good night, Daddy. Good night, Bug. He turned the light off and stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he went to the second bedroom, to the desk, and sat down. He didn't open the spreadsheet. He didn't look at the stack of papers. He just sat there in the quiet house while the sleet came down outside, thinking about tomorrow, and about the shape of things, and about what it meant that the ground had shifted in a direction that wasn't down. And after a while, he went to bed. They left the house at 6:15 in the morning. The sleet had stopped overnight and left the streets with that particular washed-clean quality, everything slightly sharper than usual, The bare trees along Birchwood Lane standing dark against a sky that was the specific gray of very early morning before the light decided what it was going to do. Nathan had been up since 4:30. Not insomnia exactly. He'd slept a few hours, the shallow kind that left him functional but not rested. He'd made coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the dark and didn't think about anything specific, which was a skill he'd developed over years of pre-mission waiting. The ability to occupy a space between sleeping and thinking, to simply be in the hour before the thing happened. Lily came out of her room at 5:50 without being woken, already dressed, Clementine under her left arm and her small overnight bag in her hand. She'd put on the purple sweater again. He hadn't said anything about it, just helped her with her shoes, the way he always did the right one, because she couldn't reach across her own body without pain. In the truck, driving through the empty early morning streets, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Will you stay, after, in the room? As long as they let me. And if they make you leave? I'll be right outside the door." She nodded, held Clementine a little tighter, looked out the window at the passing streets, the lit windows of houses where other families were waking up to ordinary Saturdays, and Nathan thought about all the ordinary Saturdays they'd lost to this thing, the baseball games she'd watched instead of played, the swimming lessons they'd stopped after the third session when the shoulder made freestyle impossible, the birthday party where she'd sat out the three-legged race and pretended she didn't mind, and he'd watched her from across the lawn and known exactly how much she minded. 12 days ago, he'd signed the surgical consent forms with a steady hand and a jaw that wasn't. This morning, his jaw was steady too. Celeste was waiting in the hospital lobby. She was wearing dark jeans and a simple black coat, no makeup to speak of. Her hair pulled back, and she looked like someone who had not had a particularly good night either but had arrived anyway, which was all you could ask of anyone. When she saw them come through the automatic doors, she stood up from the chair she'd been in and walked toward them, and Nathan noticed she was looking at Lily first, not at him. Lily looked up at her. They hadn't met in person before. Nathan had kept those two parts of the last month largely separate, not from strategy exactly, more from instinct, a sense that Lily's medical situation and the legal and corporate dimensions of it existed in different registers that he hadn't known how to reconcile. But Lily, being Lily, had absorbed enough from her father's half of phone conversations to have formed a picture. "You're Celeste," Lily said. "I am." Celeste crouched down to Lily's level. The same instinct Dr. Soren had shown, Nathan noticed, the instinct to make yourself smaller so the kid didn't have to look up. "And you're Lily. Your dad talks about you." "He talks about you too." Lily looked at her with that frank 7-year-old assessment. "He doesn't think I notice, but I do." Celeste glanced up at Nathan for half a second, a flicker of something. He kept his expression neutral. "This is Clementine," Lily said, holding up the rabbit. "She looks reliable," Celeste said seriously. Lily considered this. "She is." She shifted Clementine back under her arm. "Are you going to wait here?" "If that's okay with you." Lily thought about it with the gravity it apparently deserved. "Okay," she said. "You can wait with my dad. He's bad at waiting alone." Nathan opened his mouth, closed it. Celeste stood back up. And when she looked at him, her eyes had the particular quality of someone trying not to smile in circumstances that didn't call for smiling and mostly succeeding. "She's not wrong," Celeste said. "She's never wrong," Nathan said. "It's exhausting." The pre-op process took an hour and 20 minutes. Nathan stayed through all of it. The nursing assessment, the IV placement, which Lily endured with tight-jawed stoicism and a grip on Clementine that was extremely firm, the visit from the anesthesiologist, a gentle woman named Dr. Park, who explained everything at Lily's level without being condescending about it, which Lily rewarded with actual engagement rather than the polite but closed expression she deployed for adults who talked down to her. Dr. Wallace Chen came in at 7:45 in his surgical cap, the same precise and unhurried quality about him that he'd had in the consult, and he crouched down to Lily's level the same way Celeste had, the same way Dr. Soren had, and Nathan thought about how the adults who were good with children all seemed to understand that particular thing, that the level you approached from mattered as much as what you said when you got there. "How are you doing?" Dr. Chen asked her. "I'm okay," Lily said. A pause. "I'm a little scared." That's reasonable, he said. I want to tell you something true, okay? I've done this specific surgery many times, and every single one of those kids has been better afterward. Not perfect right away. It takes time, but better. He looked at her steadily. I'm going to take very good care of you in there. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Can Clementine come? Doctor. Chen considered this with what appeared to be genuine deliberation. Clementine can come to the door, he said. She'll wait right outside with your dad, and she'll be the first thing you see when you wake up. Lily assessed this compromise. Okay, she said. At 8:15, they came to take her back. Nathan walked alongside the gurney as far as they'd let him, to the double doors at the surgical suite entrance. Lily was flat on her back, watching the ceiling go by with the focused calm of someone who had decided on their strategy and was committed to it. He had her left hand in his right hand, walking beside her. At the door, she turned her head and looked at him. 12 hours, he said, which was what she'd said the night before. A callback. She almost smiled. Less now. Less now, he agreed. He squeezed her hand. She squeezed back, hard, and then let go, and the double doors swung open and she was gone. He stood at the doors for a moment, just stood there. Then he turned around and walked back to the waiting room. Celeste was there. She'd gotten coffee. 2 cups from somewhere. She'd had to leave the lobby to find it. And she handed him one without saying anything, and they sat down in the adjacent chairs, and the waiting began. Nathan Cross, who was bad at waiting alone, was not alone. The first 40 minutes were the hardest because they were the most formless. The surgery underway, but nothing to do with the information, nowhere to put the attention. He drank the coffee. He looked at his phone without seeing anything on it. He looked at the waiting room, which was filling gradually with other people carrying their own weights. A family in one corner, speaking quietly in what sounded like Tagalog. An older man alone with a crossword he wasn't solving. A young couple whose body language suggested they were trying very hard to support each other and finding it difficult. Tell me something, Nathan said. Not to fill the silence, exactly, but because the silence was a specific shape that talking might make more manageable. Celeste looked at him. What do you want to know? Anything. Something that has nothing to do with any of this. She thought about it. I grew up in Spokane, she said. My mother worked 2 jobs, a hospital admin position during the week and a grocery store on weekends. My father was mostly not present in ways that were typical and not interesting. She paused. We didn't have a lot, but she made sure we were I never felt the absence of things as deprivation. Exactly. She was very good at framing. A brief pause. She used to say that what you notice is what you have. If you notice the cold, you're cold. If you notice the blanket, you're warm. Same house, same night. That's good, Nathan said. She was a smart woman. A pause. She died when I was 23, before any of this, before the company or any of it. Her voice was even, the same way his got even when he talked about things that were old losses. Not healed, just shaped into something you could carry without it showing too much. She would have had opinions about the last month. What kind of opinions? Celeste looked at her coffee. She would have said I should have caught it sooner. She had very little patience for the idea that running something large exempted you from knowing what it was doing. A pause. She also would have said that what you do when you find out is more important than the fact that you didn't know. She looked at the double doors across the waiting room. I'm still trying to decide if that's generous or just accurate. Probably both, Nathan said. She nodded slowly. He told her about Rachel, not all of it, not the full story, that was too large and too interior for a waiting room, but pieces of it. How they'd met, when he was back from his second deployment and she was working at a community health clinic in Tacoma and had absolutely no patience for the stoic military man routine and had told him directly, on their second date, that he could either talk to her like an actual person or save them both time. How she'd laughed. How she'd been the one who insisted on trying for a baby when Nathan's argument was that the timing wasn't right, and she'd said timing was never right. That was the point of timing. You made it right. How she'd been gone before Lily's second birthday, a thing that the heart's logic still refused entirely to accept, even 3 years later. She sounds like someone who took up the right amount of space, Celeste said. Nathan looked at her. Yeah, he said. That's exactly right. She never took up too little and she never took up too much. He paused. Lily has that. She got it directly. She did, Celeste said, and there was a warmth in it that was not performed. They sat. Time moved in the specific elastic way it moved in waiting rooms, simultaneously too slow and too fast, each minute an eternity while the hours somehow accumulated. A nurse came out at 10:15 and told Nathan the surgery was progressing well, which was standard and meant almost nothing, but which he received with a physical relief that was disproportionate and real. At 10:45, Celeste's phone went off. She looked at it and something changed in her face. Not dramatically, but the way a room changed when the air pressure shifted. What? Nathan said. It's my attorney. She looked at him. There's been a development in the federal case. Can I? She gestured toward the door. Go, he said. I'll be here. She went. Through the glass lobby wall, he could see her outside on the sidewalk, phone to her ear, the cold November air making visible the quick, focused pace of her breathing. He watched without watching, the way you watch things peripherally when your main attention was somewhere else entirely. She came back in 12 minutes, sat down. Harlow took a deal, she said. He flipped, agreed to full cooperation with the U.S. attorney in exchange for reduced sentencing consideration. She looked at the double doors. He's turning over everything. Internal communications going back 32 months, distribution records for the falsified marketing materials, the financial records showing the calculations that were made about recall costs versus continued sales. Nathan absorbed this. Pratt & Oates? They'll be indicted on the strength of Harlow's cooperation. Their attorneys have been calling the U.S. Attorney's office since yesterday. A pause. When the top of the structure decides to cooperate, the ones below him don't have much to negotiate with. So it's done, Nathan said. The federal piece. The criminal piece is effectively done. The civil litigation will take longer, probably 2 to 3 years before the affected families see settlements. But the liability is established. The criminal record is there. She looked at her hands. There's no version of this where it gets buried now. He thought about Gregory Falk, Harlow's attorney, calling him the night before Lily's surgery with the smooth voice and the confidentiality agreement. What Harlow had been trying to buy with that call, the father of one of the damaged children going quiet, removing one source of independent documentation from the federal case before it was too late. He called me the night before the surgery, Nathan said, Harlow's attorney, offering a settlement with a gag clause. I know, my attorney told me. Her jaw was set. They were trying to build a firewall before Harlow realized the firewall wasn't going to hold. It didn't hold. No, she said. It didn't. Dr. Chen came out at 12:40. Nathan saw him come through the double doors and was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to stand, the way the body moved on its own when the thing you'd been waiting for finally arrived. Doctor. Chen walked toward him with the deliberate pace of someone who had learned that the pace of approach told families something before the words did, and his face was carrying good news in the specific way of someone who was trying to be professionally measured about it and not entirely succeeding. She's out, he said. Surgery went very well. Nathan put his hand over his mouth for a second. Just a second. Then, the implant? Removed completely. The tissue damage was consistent with what the imaging showed, localized, manageable. We placed the replacement anchor in a good position. Dr. Chen paused. The good news is that at her age, the tissue recovery capacity is significant. The damage from the original device should resolve largely completely with proper physical therapy. I'd expect her to have full function within 4 to 5 months. Full function, both arms, monkey bars, eventually. She's in recovery now, Doctor. Chen continued. She was asking for Clementine before she was fully awake, which I'm told is typical. The professionalism flickered briefly. She's a tough kid, Mr. Cross. Yeah, Nathan said. His voice came out rough at the edges. Yeah, she is. He sat back down. Celeste was looking at him, and he was looking at the double doors. And for a moment, the waiting room with its fluorescent lights and its other families and its crossword puzzle man was very sharp and very present and very much the specific location where the 14 months ended. He felt Celeste's hand close over his for a moment, brief, firm, not lingering, and then she let go. And he didn't say anything about it, and she didn't either. They let him into recovery 20 minutes later. Lily was small against the hospital bed, the way kids always looked small in hospital beds. The scale wrong, the white sheets too large around her. She was drowsy, the anesthesia still working its way out. Her left hand curled around Clementine on the pillow beside her head. The right shoulder was bandaged. Her face was slack with the particular relaxed vulnerability of deep post-surgical rest. When she heard him pull the chair close, she opened her eyes. They were unfocused for a moment, then found him. "Hey, Bug," he said. "Hey." Barely a voice. "How do you feel?" A long, slow blink, then, with great effort and complete seriousness, "Weird. That's normal. It'll pass." She looked at Clementine, checked her presence apparently, seemed satisfied. Then she looked back at him. "Did it work?" "Yeah," he said. "It worked." She closed her eyes again, opened them after a moment. "Different hurt?" "Yeah, it's going somewhere now." She thought about this with the muffled deliberateness of someone thinking through anesthesia. Then something moved across her face that was not quite a smile. Her face was too tired for a full smile, but was the emotional equivalent. The specific expression of a 7-year-old who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just been told she can put it down. "Okay," she said, and then she was asleep. Nathan sat with her for 2 hours, just sat there. Didn't look at his phone. Didn't think about anything in particular. Just watched his daughter sleep and listened to her breathe and let the specific quality of the room be what it was. When he came back out to the waiting room, Celeste was still there. She'd gotten food from somewhere. 2 sandwiches, which she handed him with the practical no-ceremony quality she applied to most things. He took one, sat down, ate half of it. "She said it worked," he said. Celeste looked at him. First thing she asked, whether it worked. He shook his head. 7 years old. "She's been waiting 14 months for the answer," Celeste said quietly. Of course, that was the first question. He looked at the sandwich in his hand. Outside the lobby windows, the November afternoon had gone fully dark, the way Pacific Northwest afternoons did in this season, the light just deciding at some point that it was done and leaving without much ceremony. The hospital was lit up against it, warm and functional, and doing its job. "I've been thinking about what to do with the legal settlement," he said, "when it comes through." Celeste waited. There are going to be other families. 31 confirmed cases, and that number is still moving. Families who spent months where the doctor said, "Let's monitor it," and the bills kept coming and the answer wasn't coming. He looked at the lobby doors. "I want to do something that's useful to them, not just take the money and go quiet." "What are you thinking?" "A foundation. Medical advocacy, specifically for families dealing with defective device cases. Help them navigate the system, the regulatory process, the legal options, the specialist access. The things I had to figure out from scratch." He paused. "I'm a medic and a former SEAL. I'm not a lawyer or a nonprofit administrator. I'd need help building it correctly." Celeste was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have approximately 14 months of unscheduled time ahead of me," she said carefully. "Given that I no longer run a company, and I know the regulatory structure of the medical device industry better than most people in the country, and I've been thinking, since approximately the day I turned the documents over to the U.S. attorney, about what useful looks like from here." He looked at her. "I'm not offering money," she said before he could say anything. "I know you won't take money. I'm offering work, actual work, building the structure, the regulatory expertise, the network." A pause. "If you want it." He thought about the coffee shop the first day, when he'd refused her check. He thought about everything that had happened in the space between that refusal and this waiting room, which was a very large amount of life compressed into a very short time. "Yeah," he said, "I want it." What followed was 3 months that moved differently than the 14 before them. Lily's recovery was not graceful. It was messy and frustrating and included 2 separate episodes where she pushed the shoulder too hard too soon and paid for it, and 2 weeks where the physical therapy exercises made her cry every single session, and she did them anyway because she was Rachel's daughter, and Rachel's daughter did not stop doing things because they were hard. By the end of January, she could reach above her head with both arms. By February, she was climbing the play structure at the park with Nathan spotting her from below, his hands ready and his heart doing something complicated in his chest that was equal parts terror and something else he'd stopped trying to name precisely. The federal case against Harlow, Pratt, and Oates moved with the compressed efficiency of a U.S. attorney's office working a case that had clean documentation and a cooperating witness who'd already told them everything. Harlow pled guilty to 3 federal counts in late December. Pratt followed in January. Sandra Oates, whose attorneys had initially indicated she intended to fight the charges, changed course in February when the full scope of the communications evidence became publicly available through the criminal filings, which included her name on 13 separate emails related to the suppression of safety data. The guilty pleas were covered by the press. Nathan talked to the Seattle Times reporter in January, 3 weeks after Lily's 6-week post-surgical check confirmed the recovery was on track. He sat in the same coffee shop on Pike where he'd met Celeste the first time and talked for 2 hours. The reporter was a woman named Kim Ashworth, who had been covering the Meridian Apex story since the recall went public, and who asked good questions without pushing past the boundaries he set, which he respected. He told her about the 14 months, about the FDA database, about the falsified marketing documents in Lily's surgical file. He told her about Lily asking if the new doctor was going to say the same thing as all the others. The article ran on a Sunday. By Monday morning, he had 400 emails. Most of them were from families. He read everyone. Took 3 days, spread across evenings after Lily was in bed, drinking coffee that went cold and refilling it and reading. Some of them were from families with confirmed orthosecure cases, families who'd been in the same fog he'd been in, who'd gotten the same non-answers, who'd been trying to figure out where to go. Some were from families with other devices, other manufacturers, other versions of the same structural problem. The system that was supposed to protect them had made a calculation about cost, and the cost had been absorbed by their children's bodies. He answered as many as he could. Not all at once. He wasn't capable of all at once, and trying to pretend he was would have made the responses useless. He answered them the way he'd learned to do hard things, methodically, one at a time, doing what was directly in front of him. The Lily Cross Foundation was formally incorporated in March, 7 months after the accident on I-5, 5 months after the FDA recall, 3 months after Lily's surgery. The name was Lily's idea. Nathan had suggested something more institutional sounding, and she had looked at him with the expression she deployed for suggestions she found insufficient and said, "It should have my name. That way people know it's for kids." He hadn't argued with that. Celeste built the regulatory framework. She knew the FDA's device safety process from the inside, knew the legal architecture of liability in medical device cases, knew the specific vocabulary and the specific channels that families without industry connections had no way of navigating. She did it with the same compressed, focused energy she'd brought to everything else. Working from a small office she'd set up in Pioneer Square, far from the downtown towers where Meridian Apex had its logo on a building, arriving early and staying late and calling Nathan with questions that were genuinely good questions, not performed collaboration. They argued about the intake process for the first 3 weeks. Nathan wanted it built around medic-style triage, rapid assessment, prioritization by urgency, get the most critical cases to specialist attention first. Celeste thought the triage model undervalued the families who weren't in acute crisis, but were lost in the bureaucratic middle, the ones who had a diagnosis and a clear path, but no advocate to walk them through the regulatory and legal process. "They're not less important because they're not bleeding," she said, on a Tuesday afternoon in the Pioneer Square office, over takeout containers they'd gotten from a place down the street and largely forgotten. "I know they're not less important. I'm talking about operational capacity. We have 4 staff right now. We can't serve everyone simultaneously. We don't need to serve everyone simultaneously. We need to build a system that can route people to the right resource on the right timeline." That's what triage is. Triage is for emergencies. This is case management. He looked at her across the takeout containers. She was wearing a green sweater and had a pen stuck in her hair that she'd put there an hour ago and forgotten about. And she was entirely serious and entirely prepared to be wrong if he showed her a better model, which was the thing about arguing with Celeste Sterling. She didn't fight to win, she fought to get to the right answer, and those were different things. "Both," he said. "We need both. Emergency track for acute cases, case management track for the systemic navigation piece." She looked at him, looked at the whiteboard on the wall where they'd been mapping the process. "Yes," she said. "That's right." He pointed at the pen in her hair. She reached up, found it, looked at it, went back to the whiteboard. They built it both ways. The civil settlements began coming through in April. The litigation was still ongoing in its full scope. These things moved in stages, and the full liability picture would take years to resolve completely. But the initial group of 31 confirmed cases, of which Lily was one, reached a preliminary settlement structure in April that the attorneys on both sides had been working towards since January. The numbers were significant. Nathan's personal attorney, a woman named Joyce Tran, whom Darnell had recommended, and who turned out to be exactly the right person for this, walked him through it in a meeting that felt both surreal and entirely logical. He put a significant portion into the foundation's operating fund, kept enough for the house, for Lily's ongoing physical therapy, for the college account he'd started and stopped twice over the past 3 years as money got tight. The rest went somewhere that Rachel would have agreed with completely and immediately, without discussion. He told Lily about the settlement on a Saturday morning in April, when she was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal and watching the backyard through the window, where the first actual spring light was doing something to the maple tree that made it look less skeletal than it had all winter. "We're going to be okay," he said. "Financially. For a while." Lily ate a spoonful of cereal. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You knew." "You've been less worried looking," she said. "Since February." She considered. "Celeste says you're a different kind of worried now. Better kind." He processed this for a moment. "When did Celeste say that?" "When she came for dinner last week." Lily was watching the maple tree. "I asked her if you were okay, and she said yes, you were just a different kind of worried." A pause. "I like her." Nathan looked at his daughter, her right arm moving now with the ease that he hadn't seen in over a year, reaching across for the orange juice without thinking about it, without the habitual flinch and redirect, just reaching, and thought about the particular kinds of accounting that life performed, the things it subtracted and the things it occasionally returned. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." Lily looked at him with those eyes. "I know," she said, in the tone of someone confirming information they've had for a while. "You know too much," Nathan said. "I know the right amount," she said, which was exactly what he'd said to her about the jellyfish, the night before the surgery, reflected back with the precision of a child who stored things and knew when to use them. He had nothing to add to that. He poured more coffee, and she ate her cereal, and the maple tree did something in the April light that was worth watching. The moment he would carry longest came in May, on a Thursday afternoon that was neither particularly important nor particularly marked. Not a milestone day, not an anniversary of anything. He was at the park on Meridian Street, 3 blocks from the house, sitting on a bench with a coffee from the place on the corner while Lily played on the structure at the far end of the park, with 2 kids from her class whose names he'd been learning gradually over the past months as Lily's capacity to make and keep plans had expanded back to something like normal. He was watching without watching, the peripheral attention of a parent who has learned to give a child room while remaining available, when he saw it. The monkey bars. Lily had been circling them for 2 weeks. He'd seen it, the way she'd look at them and then look away, the calculation happening behind her eyes. The right shoulder was cleared for most activities now. Dr. Chen had signed off at the 4-month mark. But clearance and readiness were different things, and Nathan had learned the difference between them in his own body over 12 years of pushing past clearance in ways that hadn't always served him, and he'd made a specific decision not to say anything about the monkey bars, not to encourage or discourage, to let her arrive at them in her own time. She arrived at them on a Thursday in May. He watched her stand at the beginning of the bars and look at them. Her 2 classmates ran past to something else, the short attention span of 8-year-olds pulling them away, and for a moment Lily was alone at the start of the monkey bars in the afternoon light. She reached up with both hands. The right arm went up the same as the left. No flinch, no redirect, just up. She grabbed the first bar, then the second. She moved across all the 7 bars without stopping, her feet swinging free, her face tight with concentration, and something else underneath the concentration that was not quite triumph because she wasn't performing it for anyone, wasn't looking to see if her father was watching, was just entirely inside the experience of her own body doing the thing it had not been able to do for 15 months. She reached the end and dropped to the ground, and stood there for a second, both arms hanging at her sides, looking at her own hands. Then she turned around and went back to her friends. Nathan Cross sat on the bench with his coffee going cold in his hand, and the May afternoon continued doing what it was doing, completely indifferent to the specific gravity of what had just happened in the middle of it, the way the world always was. The important moments happening in ordinary light, without announcement, without architecture. He thought about the storm on I-5, the burning car, a woman in a white blouse, and the specific question she'd asked him, why? And the answer he'd given without thinking about it, because there wasn't another answer, because the alternative wasn't something he was capable of choosing. He thought about 14 months of, let's monitor it. About a public database sitting open in plain sight with 11 adverse event reports that no one had been looking at. About the spreadsheet he'd built in the second bedroom in the middle of the night, methodical and angry and trying to find the shape of a thing that had no interest in being shaped. He thought about Celeste in the hospital waiting room, handing him coffee, telling him about her mother and what her mother had said about noticing. About Harlow's attorney on the phone the night before the surgery, the smooth voice and the contingency agreement, and how easy it would have been to say yes, how reasonable it would have looked from the outside to take the money and protect your kid and let the rest of it be someone else's problem. He thought about the 400 emails, about Joyce Tran walking him through the settlement numbers, about a foundation with his daughter's name on it that was currently serving 42 families and had 3 times that on a waiting list and was going to need more staff by September. He thought about what it meant that all of this had started with one decision made in a fraction of a second on a wet highway at night that hadn't felt like a decision at the time, because there was only one option available to someone built the way he was built. He thought about the fact that the mission he'd spent 12 years training for, the one that had taken him to places he still didn't talk about and asked things of him he'd still never fully processed, had ended quietly in a parking lot in Seattle when he decided to stop re-enlisting and figure out how to be a father instead. And he thought about what Lily had told him years earlier when she was 4 and had watched him fix the broken hinge on the garden gate, working on it methodically through 3 failed attempts before the 4th one held. She'd watched the whole thing and then said, with the complete seriousness of a 4-year-old who had not yet learned to couch observations and social softening, "You don't stop, do you, Daddy?" He told her no. He didn't stop. Not because he was extraordinary. Not because he was a hero or whatever the media had decided to call him for 2 weeks after the I-5 story went national. But because stopping was a skill he'd never successfully learned, and at some point he'd stopped trying to learn it and had decided that was probably fine. That a man who couldn't stop was more useful than he was inconvenient, as long as he was pointed in a direction worth going. Lily was crossing the park toward him now, the afternoon light catching the red in her hair that she'd gotten from Rachel, walking with the specific, unhurried ease of a kid who had nowhere urgent to be and knew it. She didn't look like she'd just crossed the monkey bars for the first time in 15 months. She looked like herself, which was, he had come to understand, a more extraordinary thing than it sounded. She reached the bench and climbed up beside him and leaned against his arm, left side, the careful lean that had become habit and was slowly, week by week, becoming less careful as the shoulder held. "You saw," she said. "Yeah. I knew you saw." She looked at the park, the other kids, the ordinary Thursday afternoon. "I wasn't going to make a big deal about it." "Okay." But it was a big deal. She said it quietly, to the park, not to him exactly. "To me." "I know," he said. "I know it was." She leaned a little harder against his arm. He pressed his arm against her gently. They sat there while the park did what parks did on May afternoons, the light going golden the way it went when the day was running out of itself. And a dog was doing something to a frisbee in the middle distance, and 2 kids were arguing about something with the complete conviction of people for whom the stakes were very high and the issue was very small. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from Celeste. "The intake system is live. 14 new case inquiries in the first hour." He showed it to Lily without comment. She read it, looked at the park. "Is that a lot?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "That's a lot." "Good," she said, in the tone she used for things that were obviously correct. Then she went back to watching the dog and the frisbee. Nathan put the phone in his pocket, looked at the afternoon, thought about nothing in particular for a little while, which was its own kind of rare thing. To sit in an ordinary moment with nothing urgent pressing against the inside of your chest, nothing that needed solving before morning, no wall that required maintenance. Just a bench, just the light, just his daughter, who had climbed the monkey bars, sitting beside him with her right arm held a little more loosely than yesterday. He didn't know how to explain exactly what it felt like to be here after there. Not the events of it, which were documentable and would be documented, in the federal case record, in the Foundation's intake files and the settlement agreements, and the medical literature that Dr. Soren was working on. A paper about adverse event patterns in pediatric device cases that cited the OrthoSecure case file and would eventually be read by people who would catch things earlier because of it. Not the events. The feeling of the other side of a thing you didn't know for a long time had another side. The thing that nobody tells you about the hardest period of your life, Nathan Cross had come to believe, was not that it ends. Most people get that far. They understand, intellectually, that things end. What nobody tells you is how ordinary the ending looks, how it doesn't arrive with ceremony, how it comes on a Thursday afternoon in May with golden light and a dog and a frisbee, and the thing you've been fighting for over a year simply is, simply exists in the world without requiring your attention anymore. He'd spent 15 months in the business of getting his daughter to the other side of something. She was here now. That was enough. That was exactly enough. And in the specific way of things that are exactly enough, it was also everything.